Chapter 203. There were many odd-job disciples in Kunlun Mountain. They were at the bottom of the hierarchy in this famous sect. They did most of the hard work, but they only received negligible rewards. What they hoped for was a very big dream. Most people were like this, but only a very small number of people could reach the sky in a single bound. To some extent, Lu Chen was actually one of them. However, there were not many people like Lu Chen. In the fragrance garden where he had worked before, there were still countless odd-job disciples who were still struggling to survive, unable to make a name for themselves. Jianghu was such an ordinary odd-job disciple. He had been in the Kunlun party for many years, but there had been no improvement. In the beginning, Jianghu had actually worked hard, diligently doing all the work that he could do, tenaciously persevering to do his best in the hard work, but even so, there were no opportunities falling on his head from the sky. Therefore, Jianghu gradually slacked off. He had been dissatisfied, wronged, and angry, but he was just an ordinary person. Other than his average ability, he was actually very afraid of death. So in the end, Jianghu finally became a wily old fox, and not the kind of madman that occasionally appeared. Because he had been in the Kunlun Mountain for a long time, and because he was experienced enough in the fragrance garden, in general, Jianghu's life among the odd-job disciples was not bad. However, a few days ago, he was at a disadvantage in a dispute with a person called He Changsheng, and he was knocked unconscious on the spot. However, the main character of this dispute was not Jianghu, nor was it He Changsheng. In fact, it was a few high-ranking aristocratic children, and the matter was later left unsettled. Jianghu was very angry when he was at a disadvantage, but one day after a while, he heard something: He Changsheng had died. He died very suddenly, inexplicably, and it was said that he died very miserably. Jianghu didn't see it with his own eyes, but he heard all kinds of descriptions from the people around him. At first, he was happy with the misfortune of others, but after a long time, when he calmed down, he also felt sad for the death of a rabbit. Moreover, they heard that the murderer was very likely to be a sorcerer from the devil cult, which was even more inconceivable. To be honest, Jianghu had known He Changsheng for a long time. Although their relationship was ordinary, he really did not think that this person would have anything to do with the devil cult. After a period of time, when he had almost forgotten about this matter, another person named He brought him over and interrogated him for a long time. What did He Changsheng do? Why was the sect still investigating this murder case after he had been dead for so long? Jianghu didn't know why, but when he was confused, he actually felt a little jealous and envious. He knew that if he died in an accident, it would never attract the attention of the Kunlun party. Not many people would even pay attention to it. After all, they were all odd-job disciples. Jianghu was such an ordinary person, a selfish person with some human emotions. He had dreams before, fantasizing that one day he would become an immortal and his name would shake the world. Of course, these things seemed to be impossible now. But, who didn't want to be different? Well, if there was a chance to come. Every day when Jianghu woke up and went out, he would look at the house that He Changsheng once lived in, which was now empty and abandoned. Then he would have a thought in his heart, thinking that probably now, other than those who wanted to catch the evil sect's evil people, he was probably the only one left who still remembered He Changsheng. This was really a very strange thing. Until that morning, when there were still 6 days before the sect council meeting, Jianghu did not walk out of the door like usual. Until noon, when a passerby noticed something was wrong and reported, the guarding disciples who rushed over then discovered that Jianghu had taken the same path as He Changsheng. He was dead in his own house. Heard that his death was quite tragic. Heard that the house was full of blood. Also heard that this time it was done by the damn devil cult sorcerer again. Not sure if the devil cult of the 3 realms paid special attention to the Kunlun party, maybe they should. But now that the sect council meeting was about to be held, and He Changsheng's murder case had not been solved, the tragedy of killing Jianghu happened again, without a doubt, in front of everyone in Kunlun Mountain. it gave the Kunlun party another hard slap in the face. The devil cult's savagery was outrageous. The one who suffered the most from this slap was, of course, the leader of the Kunlun party, Reverend Idle Month. As the leader of the sect, such things happened continuously. If it happened once, it could be said to be an accident, but if it happened again, it could really make people doubt his ability. Therefore, Reverend Idle Month was furious. His angry roar in the Zhenyang Hall of Tianquan Peak could be heard not only from outside the hall, but even the people at the foot of the mountain could hear it. However, although Reverend Idle Month was extremely angry, there were some things that could not be changed by his will, and some people were not afraid of his anger. A few Yuanying realm Zenrens led by Baichao Tang were very dissatisfied with this matter. They said bluntly that the devil cult was so rampant, could people still live in the dignified Kunlun in the future? Did everyone still want their face? Why couldn't they catch the murderer after so long? Was it because the murderer was too cunning, or were they incompetent? These questions were like knives stabbing at Reverend Idle Month, making him tired of dealing with them. He was indeed unreasonable in this matter. No matter what, as the leader of a sect, it was his natural responsibility to protect his weak disciples. Even Hakushin Jinkuan did not know what to say even if he wanted to speak up for him. In order to make up for his mistake and also to show his attitude, Reverend Idle Month, who was furious, pulled a big net and started a round of investigation in the Kunlun party, vowing to catch the abominable murderer of the devil cult. For a moment, the Kunlun party was in a state of panic, and it was a mess. Lu Chen was a little far away from the chaotic situation, so he was not disturbed too much. Flying Goose platform was quiet enough, and Su Qingjuan's past power was enough for him to stay there. However, Lu Chen was obviously not very satisfied with this. After all, he still had his own things to do. And the most important and also the most puzzling point was, who was the murderer who killed Zhang Ji? No one in this world knew better than Lu Chen how he Chongqing died, but Zhang Ji's death really confused Lu Chen. Of course, the murderer could not be himself, but it did not seem to be the traitor of the devil cult that he had been searching for. The mysterious traitor of the devil cult had already drawn a map and set a time. No matter how he thought about it, Lu Chen felt that he could not think of a reason for the traitor to suddenly appear and kill again. During this period of time, shouldn't he be hiding more discreetly? Lu Chen had a lot of doubts in his heart, so he found a reason to go to the house where Zhang Ji lived on the same day to take a look. From the outside, the house seemed to be similar to the one he Chongqing lived in. They were both the most ordinary rooms for odd-job disciples. Because of the murder case, there were disciples guarding outside the house, and ordinary people were not allowed to approach. When Lu Chen stood in the distance and looked, there was a mountain breeze blowing. Soon, he smelled a bloody smell. Lu Chen did not go near there, he only looked from afar. If it was really not that the mysterious traitor suddenly went crazy and did something big again, in fact, Lu Chen did not believe this. Then the only possibility was that there was a real devil cult elite outside that had infiltrated into Kunlun Mountain. Towards this possibility, Lu Chen's expression did not even change. But just when he was about to turn and leave, his eyes suddenly looked somewhere. Over there was a very large and dense forest. Lu Chen took a long detour and entered the forest from the other side. He then walked towards the central area of the forest with ease and came to the big rock that he saw last time. He looked around and saw that all the trees were as dense as before, the air was fresh, but other than that, there seemed to be not much other than some collapsed stone pillars and slabs. Lu Chen searched the area, but he didn't find anything suspicious. He also searched the tree bark, but he didn't find anything. Just when he thought that this new devil cult sorcerer did not seem to know the rules and did not leave any token pattern to prove his identity, Lu Chen suddenly discovered another place in the forest that was somewhat different. It was that big rock. He walked up and carefully searched for a long time. Finally, near the soil, he saw a pattern. A big tree pattern with 2 leaves and 1 flower. Please show yourself and reminisce about the past. This was the meaning that Lu Chen could see in the new devil cult pattern. Then, Lu Chen's expression turned somewhat ugly. The matter was very obvious. He had used the reincarnation formation, which was rarely circulated, to set up a formation to kill He Changsheng. This matter had simultaneously attracted the attention of the traitor of the devil cult and the other devil cult members outside Kunlun Mountain. They had even extended their hands into this place. However, Lu Chen also sensed a trace of abnormality from this strange situation. That was, the devil cult people outside of Kunlun Party did not seem to be aware of the situation of this devil cult spy in Kunlun Party. Therefore, regardless of the difficulties, risking the danger of being attacked by such a powerful and famous sect like Kunlun Party, they still wanted to show their existence, intending to make contact with that spy. This made Lu Chen very surprised. Because he clearly remembered, when True Lord Tian Lan told him about this matter, he clearly and directly explained to him, that devil cult spy was a person who had received all of the devil cult's destiny. Such a person, how could the devil cult not know of him? Actually, after something had happened, they still thought of another way to guess and find him? This matter, there must be something wrong somewhere. Chapter 204. That day, after Lu Chen returned to the Flying Goose platform, he went to the edge of the cliff and looked at the vast sea of clouds and the magnificent world. He sat alone for a long time. It was not until the sky turned dark and the moon rose that the moonlight shone on his body, drawing out a lonely shadow on the ground behind him. Similarly, the moonlight shone on the depths of the Kunlun mountain range, on the 4 strange peaks between the clouds and the sky. On one of the winter peaks, snow still danced in the sky. 2 figures stood side by side on the mountain path under the moonlight. They were the headmaster of Kunlun, Reverend Idle Month, and Zhuxian. Reverend Idle Month did not look too good, and his expression was somewhat grim. From time to time, he would raise his head to look at the top of the winter peak. At the peak of the mountain, the howling snowstorm was wrapped into a ball. It was the cave where the legendary Hakushin Jinkuan cultivated. When will Master come out to see me? Reverend Idle Month asked Zhuxian. Zhuxian looked embarrassed. Senior Martial Brother, I really can't answer you. Master's closed-door cultivation is a big matter. How can I ask how long it will take? Idle Month snorted. A trace of anxiety flashed across his face. He paced back and forth on the mountain path, looking a little upset. Zhuxian advised him, Senior Martial Brother, don't be too anxious. It's just Qiandeng, Mingzhu, and a few others making a fuss. Can they really overturn the sky? Besides, no matter how bad the situation is, isn't Master still here? When the time comes, as long as Master appears, he will be able to intimidate everyone. I'm sure they won't dare to say another word. Idle Month nodded. It was obvious that he had the same thought in his heart. However, he quickly sighed and said, Junior Martial Brother, what you said is not without reason. However, I still feel that something is not quite right this time. I want to discuss it with Master. Moreover, you see, for the past few years, Master has always attended every sect council meeting. If you suddenly don't attend this year, coupled with those evil sect killings, I'm afraid it will cause people to gossip and deliberately sow discord between our master and disciple relationship. Zhuxian was silent. He and Reverend Idle Month had been brothers for many years. They were both disciples of Hakushin Jinkuan. Of course, he understood why Reverend Idle Month was so agitated. Back then, when the Kunlun party was deciding on the next leader, to be honest, among the Yuanying Jinren Idle Month was considered an outstanding figure, but he was not at the stage where he could look down on the others. There were at least 5 or 6 other Yuanying Jinren whose cultivation and strength were not weaker than his, and there were even 1 or 2 who were obviously better than him. But in the end, the one who became the Kunlun party's sect leader was still Idle Month. The biggest reason for this, everyone knew, was their common master, Hakushin Jinkuan. All these years, Reverend Idle Month was actually doing quite well in the position of sect leader. He was diligent and conscientious, but he could not convince the masses. There was never a lack of people who said strange things in the open and in the dark. This time, the incident of the devil cult killing people was getting bigger and bigger, and the criticism of Xian Yuzhenren was getting louder and louder in the sect. It was no wonder that Xian Yuzhenren was so angry and restless. In a few days' time, it would be the annual sect council meeting. Almost all the important figures in the Kunlun party would be present. At that time, it was almost expected that the evil sect killings would be brought up again. Then the doubts about Reverend Idle Month would also be raised. In front of all the important figures in the sect, of course Reverend Idle Month could not afford to lose his face. He felt that since ancient times, there had never been a sect leader of the Kunlun party who would suffer such humiliation. However, if it was like the previous years, when Hakushin Jinkun attended and sat in the Tiankun Peak's Jinyang Hall, no matter which faction of people wanted to talk nonsense, it would depend on whether they had the guts to do so or not. However, as early as a few months ago, Hakushin Jinkun had told the both of them that he might not want to attend the sect council meeting this year. Firstly, he really did not have anything important to attend. He was just there to help his disciple. Secondly, everyone felt that Reverend Idle Month had done a good job in the position of sect leader. His position was more or less stable. Therefore, he was too lazy to make the trip and simply went into closed-door cultivation. That being said, it was not wrong, but no one expected that during this period of time, the incident of the devil cult would suddenly happen, causing a storm in Kunlun sect. From top to bottom, it was restless. Those Yuanying stage Daoist masters seemed to have found an excuse to mock and ridicule Kunlun sect non-stop. Under such circumstances, Reverend Idle Month felt that it was better to invite her master to attend the sect council meeting again. Therefore, she came to the Winter Peak to ask for her master's help. However, according to Zhuxian, Hakushin Jinkun had been in closed-door cultivation for many days. The both of them did not dare to disturb Hakushin Jinkun's quiet cultivation. They could only wait on the mountain path. However, after waiting for a long time, there was still no sign of Hakushin Jinkun coming out. Reverend Idle Month was anxious. Suddenly, she said to Zhuxian, "Junior brother, I have many trivial matters to attend to in the sect. I am very busy and rarely come here. Could it be that now that Master is in closed-door cultivation, even you can't contact him at all?" Zhuxian smiled bitterly and said, "Senior brother, to be honest, I really can't contact Master now. But if you are really anxious." He paused for a moment, then lowered his voice and said softly, "Perhaps junior sister has a way? Little junior sister White Lotus?" Reverend Idle Month was stunned. "What way does she have?" Zhuxian said, "Master only accepted her as his last disciple when he was old. In addition, she is a rare five-pillar talent. Naturally, he loves her deeply. Aside from instructing her wholeheartedly when he has free time, he has also handed the transcendent artifact, the Wind Speech Compass, to junior sister White Lotus. If there's an emergency, you can ask junior sister to use the Wind Speech Compass, and perhaps you can contact Master." Reverend Idle Month was suddenly enlightened. He clapped his hands and said, "That's right. How could I forget about this? Junior brother, quickly bring me to little junior sister's cave abode. I'll ask her to contact Master for me." Zhuxian was a little hesitant. He looked at the sky and said, "Senior brother, isn't it too late now?" Zhuxian looked at the night sky. Indeed, it was already late at night. However, he quickly shook his head and said, "It's urgent. Let's settle it as soon as possible. Junior brother, lead the way. I'll talk to little junior sister." Zhuxian nodded and said, "All right. Senior brother, follow me." The two of them walked down the mountain path again. After 15 minutes, they arrived in front of the two cave abodes. Zhuxian walked over and knocked on the door before shouting loudly. The stone door of the cave abode did not move at all. Zhuxian frowned and called a few more times, but there was still no response. Reverend Idle Month was a little surprised. He walked over and asked, "Is it not in the cave abode?" Zhuo Xian shook his head. "It shouldn't be. It's so late. If I go out, I'll be breaking the sect rules. I'll call again. Maybe it's a little girl who is too sleepy to hear." As he spoke, he raised his hand again and knocked on the door while shouting. He did this for a while, but the cave abode was still tightly shut. There was no response. Zhuo Xian turned around and looked at Reverend Idle Month. At that moment, both of them had a question in their minds at the same time. It's so late. Where could the little girl have gone? The moon shone brightly in the dark night, shining on Kunlun Mountain in the shadows. On the dark mountain path, a little girl was walking contentedly. For someone of her age to walk on an empty mountain path in the dark and cold night, it was very strange no matter how one looked at it. This little girl was, of course, White Lotus. Her beautiful face was calm. Looking at the direction she was walking in, it was towards Flying Goose platform. Her clothes fluttered in the night wind, and the high collar on her neck could be seen from time to time. That was to cover up some of the wounds. Although they were basically under control, the injuries that Lu Chen had inflicted on her that day had left a very strange wound on her neck. In the end, it still hadn't completely healed. However, for some reason, White Lotus did not seem to have too much hatred for the person called Lu Chen. This was somewhat unusual for her, who had been arrogant since she was young. Even she was a little surprised. Perhaps it was because although that person was cunning and vicious, she did not have to pretend in front of him. She could say whatever she wanted and do whatever she wanted. This was really very satisfying and comfortable. Oh, there was also that black dog. In fact, the blood food secret method was not as important as she said it was. After all, she had accidentally learned it when she was young. It was not a secret method unique to her. If she really did not care about it, then she would not care about it. Anyway, she would go and bother him first. Looking at the helpless and depressed expression of the person called Lu Chen, it was still very pleasing. White Lotus thought of this in her heart. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She quickened her pace and walked towards Flying Goose platform. Just as she was walking, her expression suddenly stiffened and her footsteps immediately came to a halt. A trace of surprise and caution flashed across her eyes. At the same time, in a dark corner in front of her, 3 rays of green light suddenly emerged from the darkness. They were like dark green flames. They were like 3 eyeballs embedded in a strange and vicious face. A dark aura gushed out from that corner. White Lotus frowned slightly and took a step back. Then, she stared in that direction with a trace of vigilance on her face. The green flames swayed slowly and gradually approached. White Lotus quickly saw that it was a 3-eyed monster shaped like a small snake. It was baring its teeth at her, revealing its terrifying fangs. The 3 green lights were 3 strange green eyes that were growing on the head of that strange creature. Hiss 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 hiss. A strange sound came from the front. A trace of uneasiness flashed across White Lotus's heart. She stared at it with her guard up. But at this moment, she suddenly discovered something strange. The 3-eyed, green-eyed strange insect was staring at her, but it did not look at her face, her eyes, her hands, or her feet. The 3-eyed strange insect's eyes were staring at her neck the whole time. The neck that was wrapped by the collar and had an unhealed wound. Chapter 205. It was late at night. Lu Chen was already lying on the bed. His eyes were closed, and he looked like he was asleep. However, he seemed to wake up from his dream all of a sudden. He sat up abruptly, and a strange black flame burned in his eyes as he scanned his surroundings. When familiar things came into view one after another, Lu Chen realized that he was still in the familiar small wooden house. He sighed softly. He was in a daze for a moment. Then, he leaned against the wall and pushed open the window. A ray of moonlight that was as clear as water descended from the sky and shone on him through the window sill. Lu Chen looked at the bright moon in the sky and realized that it was rounder than yesterday. Perhaps in a few days' time, it would become round again. The moonlight on the window sill was as white as a veil. The cold wind blew past, cold and lonely. Lu Chen looked at the lonely night outside the window and suddenly thought of the figure sitting on the window sill the day before yesterday. At that time, White Lotus did not look like a vicious and mysterious person. Instead, she looked more like an innocent and cute girl. However, just as he thought of this, Lu Chen immediately shook his head and threw this dangerous thought to the back of his mind. That White Lotus was innocent and cute. There must have been many people who had this kind of thought and died in her hands. At this moment, Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. In his eyes, a black flame burned again. Somewhere in the distance, there seemed to be a throbbing power that was very familiar. He had been searching for it for a long time. It was the strange three-eyed blood-devouring bug. Lu Chen immediately became spirited. After pondering for a moment, he pressed his hand on the window sill and floated out. Then, he took advantage of the night and blended into the darkness, flying towards the mountain path. On the winter peak, in the snowstorm, Perfected Idol Month and Zhuoxian stood at the entrance of White Lotus's cave abode and looked at each other. Immortal Idol Month could not help but ask Zhuoxian, where did she go? There's a curfew in the middle of the night. If junior sister is still on Kunlun Mountain and someone sees her, it'll be a crime of disrespecting the sect's rules. Zhuoxian smiled bitterly and said, Senior brother, I really don't know. Little junior sister is extremely intelligent and has always been personally taught by master. I don't usually talk to her much. Daoist Master Idol Moon raised his head to look at the moonlight, and then looked at the even more beautiful spectacle of lightning under the moonlight, surrounded by the violent snowstorm. Then, he exhaled deeply, and then sighed again. Lu Chen moved forward in the darkness, heading towards the strange aura in the distance. That aura was very strange. For some reason, it actually triggered the power of the black fire that was hidden in the deepest part of his body. Lu Chen even had a faint feeling that it was the hunger of the black fire and the divine black flame board. They were like hungry and terrifying hunters, and their prey was the blood-devouring worms. As long as he could kill the blood-devouring worms, he could absorb even more terrifying aura of the undead. The dark aura was too obvious. It was like a beacon guiding Lu Chen's direction. However, when he rushed to the mountain path, even though Lu Chen had always been bold and calm, he could not help but change his expression. On the dark mountain path in front of him, there was a petite figure standing there. Her hands were raised high, and there were traces of ice and snow flowing from her fingertips. On the ground beside her, Lu Chen actually saw the corpses of several blood-devouring worms. Almost all of the blood-devouring worms were tightly wrapped in ice and snow. They looked extremely stiff. They were probably frozen to death. At this moment, White Lotus also seemed to have seen Lu Chen. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at him. Then, she suddenly laughed and said, How is it? Am I considered powerful? Lu Chen glanced at the corpses of the blood-devouring worms on the ground and could not help but smile bitterly. Then, he nodded and said, Powerful. Ha! White Lotus seemed to be happy all of a sudden. She put down her raised hands and walked towards Lu Chen. Then, she said casually, I originally wanted to go to the Flying Goose platform to find you, but I did not expect to encounter such strange things on the way. They were extremely vicious, so I simply killed them all. Admirable. Lu Chen nodded and said to White Lotus. White Lotus laughed and kept walking. At the same time, she said, Are your words sincere or not? Lu Chen thought for a while and said, Your cultivation method might just be able to restrain this kind of monster. But no matter what, it is still powerful. White Lotus laughed. At this time, she had already walked in front of Lu Chen. Then, she smiled sweetly and said, Then why are you here? Are you here to pick me up, stop dreaming. How could I come to pick you up? Lu Qin snorted at White Lotus's words. Just as he was about to say a few more words to mock her, he suddenly saw White Lotus's body suddenly shake a few times. She closed her eyes and did not make a sound. It was as if she had suddenly become a walking corpse and fell down. Lu Qin was shocked and subconsciously reached out to hug White Lotus's body. But as soon as he touched her body, Lu Qin's expression changed greatly. It was like the roar of darkness in the night, suddenly exploding in front of him. A wave of darkness surged over and instantly wrapped around his body. This feeling was the aura of the strange three-eyed worm. It could not be wrong. Lu Qin's expression changed several times. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and tore open Bai Lian's right sleeve with a ripping sound. Immediately, a strand of black qi appeared on her abnormally white wrist. At the same time, a twisted, protruding mark suddenly sprang up from the back of her hand. Then, it crazily rushed up, and it looked like it was about to rush past her shoulder and into her chest. Lu Qin snorted coldly. He suddenly grabbed White Lotus's shoulder with one hand and then fiercely clawed down. His 5 fingers instantly turned black. Then, black flames gushed out from his hand and directly burned into White Lotus's flesh. White Lotus lost her voice and cried out in pain. But at the same time, the black gas that was rushing up suddenly stopped. It seemed to have seen the most terrifying thing in the world. For a moment, it did not dare to rush forward. Instead, it turned around and fled. But at this time, Lu Qin grabbed White Lotus's shoulder with one hand. His other hand followed the root and directly wrapped around White Lotus's elbow. After a moment, there was a sudden scream. A strange three-eyed worm rushed out from White Lotus's wrist with its fangs and claws bared. After the strange worm broke out, White Lotus moaned and directly fell to the ground. It looked like she had fainted. And Lu Qin looked at the evil blood-sucking worm that flew into the air and seemed to want to escape. He suddenly reached out and directly grabbed the body of the blood-sucking worm in the air. The blood-sucking worm roared and turned its head. It seemed to be completely enraged. Just as it was about to attack Lu Qin, there was suddenly a deep and boundless black flame that was like an iron curtain that suddenly burned. It burned on Lu Qin's hand. It also burned on White Lotus's arm. Even from her neck, there were a few strange black lights that lit up. Under such a pincer attack, the blood-sucking worm had no way out. It was instantly burnt and melted in that raging black flame. Everything quieted down and the tranquility of the night was restored. Lu Qin stood in the same place and muttered to himself for a moment. Then he bent down and picked up all the carcasses of the blood-sucking worms. Carrying the unconscious White Lotus, he turned around and left with large strides. Lu Qin brought White Lotus back to his wooden house. In fact, he didn't really want to do this. But first of all, he really didn't know where to send this girl. Even if he knew White Lotus was a member of Kunwa Cities by clan, it was the middle of the night and there was a curfew, so he naturally couldn't send her there. Everything could only wait until the sun rose tomorrow. Apart from this, Lu Qin had another reason why he couldn't give up on White Lotus. It was the sudden appearance of the strange three-eyed worm. Why did this vicious worm, known as an ancient killing weapon, suddenly besiege White Lotus? He felt that he had to get to the bottom of this matter. White Lotus's body, or the foundation of White Lotus's cultivation, was far more powerful than Lu Qin imagined. At first, Lu Qin expected White Lotus to sleep for half a day, but in fact, White Lotus only woke up after an hour. What happened? After seeing that White Lotus had woken up, Lu Qin didn't bother to inquire about her well-being and directly asked her. White Lotus also seemed very straightforward. She said, "I don't know. I'm asking about those strange three-eyed worms. Why did they suddenly attack you?" "I don't know either." White Lotus sat up with some difficulty. Then, like how Lu Qin sat most of the time, she leaned against the wall next to the window and said, "In any case, there were no signs at the beginning. Several of them suddenly rushed out and almost swallowed me alive. Lu Chen furrowed his brows, clearly a little puzzled. On the contrary, White Lotus seemed to be more at ease. Taking advantage of this rare free time, she looked at the somewhat messy little wooden hut and then looked at the night sky on the windowsill. Her face showed a trace of a gratified smile. Probably because of this quiet scenery, White Lotus's heart finally calmed down. Then, she concentrated for a moment and suddenly said, "But I saw a strange phenomenon." Lu Chen's spirit was shaken. He stared at her and said, "What is it?" White Lotus said, "Just now, all those strange three-eyed worms, I don't know why, from the beginning to the end, all of them seemed to be staring at my neck, as if there was a peerless delicacy on my neck." Lu Chen's expression slightly changed. He said in a low voice, "Your neck?" White Lotus smiled and said, "It's the wound that you caused and hasn't healed yet. Why do I have a feeling that although those strange worms don't look smart, perhaps they are very interested in the thing that you cultivate with. One day, they will come for you again." White Lotus said threateningly, as if she was pronouncing a sentence to Lu Chen. Lu Chen was silent. He thought to himself, could it be that those blood-devouring worms also have an abnormal desire for the power of the black flame? He then thought of the unimaginably terrible dark power that had appeared in the depths of Kunlun during the great earthquake in Kunlun. Lu Chen stared at White Lotus and did not speak. White Lotus felt a little uncomfortable under his gaze. She frowned and asked, "What are you looking at?" Lu Chen sighed and said, "Young girl, put on your clothes first." Chapter 206. White Lotus stared blankly for a moment, then suddenly cried out in alarm, subconsciously raising her hands to cover her chest. However, her right arm was injured, and she had only raised it halfway before her face paled. She groaned in pain and directly drooped down. In the end, she could only use one hand to cover her chest. But very quickly, just as she was about to yell at Lu Chen for being despicable and shameless, White Lotus suddenly discovered that most of her clothes were still intact. The only thing missing was her injured right arm. The sleeve from the shoulder down had been torn off, revealing her white jade-like skin. It was an exceptionally moving sight. But at this moment, on her arm, there were still a few wounds. The flesh on her wrist had split open, and there were a few startling black fingerprints on her shoulder. At this time, Lu Chen opened his mouth and said, "What are you screaming for? Isn't it just a torn sleeve? I kindly advised you to put on some clothes to prevent you from catching a cold. Why do you look like your entire body has been seen by someone?" White Lotus spat and looked at Lu Chen with disdain. "You're a man and you're taking advantage of my tongue. Aren't you embarrassed?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, "Hey, little girl, speak clearly. What do you mean I took advantage of you? Just now, I risked my life to save you from the mouth of that strange three-eyed insect." White Lotus sneered and said, "Don't give me that. You stinky men, do you think I don't understand? Don't you all see that I am beautiful and want to take advantage of me? You have all kinds of dirty thoughts. Do you dare say you don't?" "I don't." Lu Chen's expression was solemn as he said to White Lotus, "I have to make this clear to you. I don't have the slightest bit of that kind of thought." White Lotus looked at him and said, "Then let me ask you, what do you think of my appearance? Is it considered beautiful?" "Of course not." Lu Chen paused for a moment. It seemed that he still couldn't deceive his conscience. He muttered and said, "All right, you are indeed beautiful, but I am not interested. Only a ghost would believe you. There isn't a single good man in this world." Lu Chen said, "You're just a little girl, where did you learn so many messy things? I won't talk about those cruel and vicious methods. You're so young, what do you know about these matters between a man and a woman?" White Lotus said angrily, "Don't look down on me. I know everything." Then, he sneered and said, "If I didn't know all this, I'm afraid I would have been fooled by you stinky men." Lu Chen looked her up and down and suddenly laughed. He shook his head and didn't say anything. White Lotus didn't know why, but she felt more and more uncomfortable being stared at like this. She became more and more annoyed and said angrily, "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a beauty like me?" Lu Chen sternly said, "It's fine if you scold me for my low skill, cruel methods and low moral character. In any case, we've fought and killed several times these past few days, we're enemies and not friends. But no matter what, you can't slander me for liking a little girl like you. I'm not interested in you." White Lotus was furious. She slapped the window sill and said angrily, "Tell me clearly, what do you mean by this? You're saying I'm ugly?" Lu Chen said, "You're not ugly, but I'm not blind. I'm just not interested in you." Seeing that White Lotus was so angry that her face turned pale and looked like she was about to get up and fight, Lu Chen hurriedly waved his hand and said, "Hey, hey, hey. Do you have any upbringing? You're still a girl at such a young age. You're always talking about killing people at the slightest provocation. Can you listen to me properly?" White Lotus angrily sat back down and glared at Lu Chen. "Tell me, what do you mean by your words?" Lu Chen shrugged and said, "I don't mean anything. I do like women, but they have to be mature women. You're just a 10-year-old girl. How could I be interested in you?" White Lotus was stunned for a moment. Her expression softened a little, but then she revealed a suspicious expression. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "Are you serious?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "Why would I lie to you? In short, if you're worried, you can leave now. I won't send you off." White Lotus thought for a moment. She put on her clothes and got off the bed. She said, "I'd better go. You're unreliable. I want to stay away from you." Lu Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He stepped aside and shook his head with a smile. "Then you'd better keep your word. Stay away from me in the future. Don't come looking for me." White Lotus walked a few steps and suddenly turned her head to look at him. She said, Have you slept with other women before?" Lu Chen was stunned. Then he nodded calmly and said, "Yes." "Disgusting," White Lotus said. "What do you know?" Lu Chen scolded with a smile. White Lotus thought for a moment and said, "I don't believe that the women you slept with before were more beautiful than me. What makes you say that I'm not as good as them?" Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. After a moment, he waved his hand to drive away White Lotus. He said, "You're getting more and more outrageous. Is this something a little girl like you can ask?" White Lotus was unmoved. She sneered and said, "Can a little girl kill and bleed like me?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes. White Lotus said to him, "Tell me clearly and I'll leave immediately. Otherwise, I won't feel comfortable if I don't understand this matter." Lu Chen looked at her elegant and beautiful face. She was like a fairy. Suddenly, he had a kind of illusion. After a moment, he sighed. He thought that this world was really full of evildoers. Eccentric people could be seen everywhere. "All right, you can leave after I say it." Lu Chen said to her, "Women and girls are different. Besides a face, there are many parts of a woman's body that are equally charming. You're still young and don't have it yet. So, I like other women, but I'm not interested in you. You don't have to worry that I'll do something indecent to you. Can you understand what I'm saying now?" White Lotus stared at him. Lu Chen looked calm and met her gaze. The two looked at each other for a moment. White Lotus suddenly blushed. She reached out and hugged her chest. She spat and said, "Shameless. Vulgar. Shameless." After saying that, she turned around and ran away like a wisp of smoke. Only Lu Chen was left in a daze. He was stunned and speechless. After a long while, he said blankly, "What did I do this time? She called me shameless, vulgar, and shameless again. there were only 5 days left until the night of the full moon. The Kunlun party could be said to be tight on the inside but loose on the outside. The sect council was closely related to the majority of high-level cultivators. However, for the vast majority of the lowest-level disciples, it was like two different worlds. The head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukanjinren, was in a good mood recently. The biggest reason was, of course, his beloved disciple, He had recently rushed to the Jin Dan realm and became a Jin Dan friar. In terms of age, He was not even 30 years old. Although he was a few years older than Masato Kihara's disciple, Su Qingjun, at his age, to be able to practice to the Jin Dan realm was still an astonishing achievement. His future achievements could absolutely be said to be limitless. At least, in the praises and comments of the elders, the evaluation of He was almost exactly the same as that of Su Qingjun. Yuanying was within reach, and there was hope for a true monarch. For the younger generation of cultivators, there was almost no higher evaluation than this sentence regarding their talent, innate aptitude, and potential. It was also because of this that Dukanjinren was very proud. However, in this happy mood, there were still some flaws. For example, his most supported senior brother, Idle Month, was not having a good time recently. Another example was his newly advanced disciple, He, although he had cultivated to the Jin Dan realm, he did not look ecstatic and looked solemn all day long. Dukanjinren, of course, was well aware of the reason for this. And to be honest, these two things were caused by one thing, and that was the evil devil cult killing people. The first thing had just calmed down, and the result was that it happened again. These evildoers of the devil cult were simply rampant and lawless. It was hateful that they were as timid as mice and did not dare to come out to fight. They only dared to hide in the dark corners and plot against those almost powerless odd-job disciples. It was despicable. Dukanjinren had always been the most staunch supporter of spiritual master Idle Month. He was very disgusted with the actions of the few spiritual masters of Baichao Tang. It was clearly the evil deeds of the evildoers of the devil cult, but Qian Deng, Mingzhu, and the others were pointing the spearhead at their senior brother. However, although he thought so in his heart, when someone suggested to him that He should come out again to continue investigating the devil cult, Dukanjinren still firmly refused. He really felt sorry for his disciple and did not want him to get involved in this mess again. These days, because the sect council was imminent, he was also very busy. But occasionally when he had free time, he would call He along for a walk, as a way to ease his anxiety. He knew his disciple too well. He was talented, but his thoughts were too deep, and many things were bottled up in his heart. And a few days ago, the death of his most valued younger brother, He Gang, had a much deeper impact on He than what he showed on the surface. Therefore, on this day, when he and He were casually walking on the mountain and chatting, he also deliberately mentioned this to him. He was an extremely intelligent person, and almost immediately understood his master's deep meaning. He immediately thanked his master. Dukanjinren had a gratified smile on his face, but he still sighed in his heart. The more normal he behaved, the more it showed that the knot in his heart had not been untied, and could only be left for the future. The two walked for a while, and when they were ready to return to the mountain, He said to Dukanjinren, "Master, I don't want to go back for the time being, so I'll just walk around here. You are busy, so you should go back first." Dukanjinren glanced at him and said, "All right, then you take care of yourself, remember what I said to you just now." He smiled and said, "Master, rest assured, disciple understands." Dukanjinren smiled and flew up into the air. He looked at his master's disappearing figure, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. Not long after, he heaved a long sigh, but his face revealed some melancholy as he turned around and walked away. Just that he had only walked a few steps when his footsteps suddenly froze, and his expression changed greatly. He suddenly discovered that beside him, a huge figure had suddenly appeared there. Like a ghost, even with his current cultivation, he did not sense it at all. Chapter 207. To a Jin Dan friar, in terms of cultivation realm, it could already be said to be extremely powerful. Looking at the entire cultivation world, countless cultivators, countless families, wherever he went, he could be considered as an elite. And with Jin Dan friar's sharp senses, perhaps if they really fought, he might not be a match for the more powerful Yuanying realm Jinren, but for a Yuanying Jinren to suddenly approach Jin Dan friar without anyone noticing, that was also extremely difficult. But right now, he suddenly met such a person, a huge and fat figure, suddenly appeared beside him. So close at hand. At that moment it was like the blood in He's entire body had frozen, and he practically instinctively let out a furious roar as he retreated. At the same time, he swung his arm and struck out with his strongest Dao art and divine ability. A bright light suddenly lit up, pierced through that shadow, his body like an arrow leaving the bow retreated, looked like he was about to break through the darkness. But the strange thing happened again, that huge figure like a shadow followed, directly followed up, and following what seemed to be a casual sound of a sleeve fluttering, an instant later, all of He's supernatural powers were all broken, dissipated into nothingness. Heaven and earth were silent, all living things were silent. A gust of aura came from the shadow in front of He, that tall and sturdy figure, had a mountain-like imposing manner, like covering the sky and covering the earth, pressing down on him. He's body shook violently, staggered back, suddenly his legs softened, he almost knelt down. But he tried his best to hold on, until that tall and fat man lowered his head, a pair of eyes landed on his face. Like a sudden clap of thunder, instantly exploded, He's mind went blank. In that instant, he directly sat on the ground, his entire body drenched in sweat, his face pale, almost devoid of blood. The pressure like landslide and tsunami, swept over, he felt that his entire body's flesh and bones seemed to be out of control, perhaps the next moment it would collapse and explode. His heart was also extremely shocked. This was the first time in his life that he met such a terrifying person, almost not like a mortal, like a deity. Deity. At that moment, his eyes suddenly widened. He stared at the tall and sturdy figure in front of him. For some reason, even though he was right in front of him, even though that person seemed to be looking at him, his mind still couldn't reflect that person's face. Was this the might of a true monarch of the divine transformation stage? He didn't dare to look anymore. He was afraid that if he held on any longer, he would really turn into ashes. He could only lower his head and kneel on the ground with a thud. He said in a hoarse voice, "Disciple He pays respect to." Immortal. It was rare for Su Qingjun to get up early in the morning. After she greeted Lu Chen, she hurriedly went down the mountain. Her destination was her home in Kunwu City. The reason was also very simple. The Su family at the foot of the mountain had sent word that Sumo's condition, which had originally stabilized, had worsened in the past 2 days. Watching Su Qingjuan's receding figure, Lu Chen's expression became somewhat cold. In his heart, he recalled the mysterious corpse watcher in the dark grave. The mind-manipulating technique was a very overbearing divine ability. It seemed that he didn't show any mercy to Sumo that day, and it really hurt her very foundation. Standing on the Fian platform that had once again become quiet, Lu Chen's expression fluctuated and his brows were tightly knitted. The situation had already begun to become more and more chaotic. Lu Chen even had a feeling that it was beyond his expectations. Moreover, he always felt that there were some variables in this matter that he hadn't thought of before. Who was that so-called traitor of the devil cult? What was he planning to do by lurking on the mountain of Kunlun? But why didn't the people of the devil cult seem to know of his existence? All these doubts intertwined with each other, making him feel as if he had fallen into a mess. He only felt that everything in front of him was chaotic, and he couldn't see what was going to happen in the future. In another 5 days, it would be the night of the full moon. According to the agreement made by the traitor of the devil cult, he and Lu Chen would meet on that night. Perhaps that would be the time when the truth would be revealed. But would things really be so simple? Perhaps because he had been in the dark for too long, Lu Chen always subconsciously felt doubtful. He always felt that there was no such simple thing in this world. Sometimes he also knew that what he was thinking was actually wrong, but the habit he had developed over the years always made him involuntarily think this way. Perhaps it was better to make some preparations first? Has the damned Baldy come back? At noon that day, Lu Chen also came to Conquest City and asked Old Ma in the Black Hill Pavilion. Seeing that Lu Chen had come, Atsu was very happy. It ran to his side and jumped up and down, appearing to be very affectionate. Seeing Atsu's appearance, Lu Chen also smiled and kept reaching out to stroke its head. He then raised his eyes to look at Old Ma. Old Ma shrugged and said, "I don't know. But since he promised to come back before the night of the full moon you mentioned, it should be in the next few days." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Good. If he comes back and contacts you, find a way to notify me or tell him to come find me. I have some things to ask him." Old Ma's eyes flashed and he said, "What's wrong? Is there something?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and said, "There are some things I feel strange about, so I want to ask him." Old Ma seemed to want to ask more questions, but when he saw Lu Chen's expression, he quickly swallowed his words. After a while, he nodded and said, "Good. Don't worry. I'll inform you immediately if there's any news." Lu Chen smiled and nodded at him. He then squatted down and played with Atsu for a while before saying, "I'll send Atsu away today. I don't want to leave it here with you." Old Ma asked, "Where do you plan to send it?" Lu Chen said, "I don't have a fixed place. I'll just find a mountain forest a bit further away from the city and let it stay there. After the night of the full moon, I'll finish my business and come to find it." Old Ma frowned and said, "You'll just leave it alone in the mountain forest? Will something happen to it?" Lu Chen laughed and patted Atsu's head. Then he stood up and said, "It's okay. This dog has become stronger recently. It will survive. Right, Atsu?" He lowered his head and asked Atsu. Atsu wagged his tail and barked a few times, as if he was responding to his words. Old Ma glanced at Atsu and suddenly made a gesture to Lu Chen, asking him to follow him to the side. Then he looked slightly serious and said to Lu Chen, "What's wrong with this dog?" Lu Chen said, "There's nothing wrong with it. It's quite good." Old Ma snorted and said, "Don't lie to me with this kind of nonsense. There must be something wrong with Atsu. That's why you're so sneaky. By the way, there's something I haven't told you yet. It's also related to Atsu." Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. Looking at Old Ma's serious expression, he couldn't help but be a little surprised and said, "What happened?" Old Ma took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Recently, I found that some animal corpses often appear around this house. Most of them are wild cats and dogs. Occasionally, there are birds, chickens, and ducks. They all died in the same way. Their throats were directly bitten by sharp teeth, and then they bled to death." Lu Chen was silent for a moment. His expression also became cold. He glanced at Old Ma and said, "What do you think?" Old Ma pointed at Atsu in the distance and said, "Did it do it?" Lu Chen said, "I'm not in the city, and I didn't see it with my own eyes. I don't know, but Atsu has never done this kind of thing before." Old Ma looked at him deeply and said, "You really don't have anything to hide from me, right?" Lu Chen met his gaze and suddenly smiled, saying, "Of course there is." Old Ma was furious and said, "Damn it. I knew you weren't honest. Tell me." Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "There are some things that I don't need to tell you. In short, you have to believe me. I won't do anything bad to you." Old Ma looked at him for a while and suddenly sighed and said, "Well, be careful." Lu Chen looked at him and his eyes gradually became gentle. He gently patted his shoulder and suddenly said, "Old Ma, after this, why don't we both retire?" He smiled and said, "These days are quite boring." Old Ma was silent for a moment and said, "Okay." Lu Chen took Black Dog out of Conquest City. Along the way, he saw the Su family's mansion in the distance. He could see that although the mansion looked calm on the outside, everyone inside seemed to be in a hurry and had solemn expressions. He looked at it for a while and then turned around and left. After leaving Kunwa City, Atsu was even happier and kept running on the wide road. Lu Chen didn't keep walking along the road and quickly led it to the wilderness. As they walked, they arrived at the foot of a nameless hill more than 10 miles away from Kunwa City. There was a forest on the hill, and the area was vast. There was no one around, which was exactly what it meant to be a wilderness. Lu Chen called Atsu over and stroked its head. He then squatted down and stared at Atsu's eyes. Atsu suddenly became nervous and took a step back. Lu Chen shook his head and said softly, "You've already drunk the heart's blood and your bloodline has been stimulated. It's almost impossible for you to live like before. The night of the full moon will be the time for you to transform and advance. At that time, no one will be able to help you and you can only rely on yourself. Since ancient times, the sacred beasts of the southern part of the chaotic land have all narrowly escaped death like this. If you can't pass this trial, then find a place to die." Lu Chen quietly said to it. Atsu lowered its head. As if it had sensed something, a complicated light suddenly appeared in its eyes. It slowly leaned forward, stuck out its tongue and licked Lu Chen's hand. Lu Chen glanced at the towering Kunlun mountain in the distance and said, "In the next few days, I also have to work on that mountain. It should be very dangerous. I'm not sure if I'll survive. You see, people like us who have been shadows for a long time are all like this. We always feel like we're in danger of dying. Tell me, what's the point of living like this? Am I right, Atsu?" Lu Chen sat on the ground and said to Atsu. Atsu slowly walked over and squatted down next to Lu Chen. It looked like it was sitting side by side with him. The sky unknowingly darkened. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on their backs. "I hope we can still meet after the night of the full moon," Lu Chen said. Woof. Chapter 208. Amidst the clouds in the sky, on the winter peak. Hakushin Jinkuan's 3 disciples, perfected idle month, Zhuoxian, and White Lotus gathered in Zhuoxian's cave abode. They stood side by side and looked at the ancient plate on the table in front of them. Compared to the 2 senior brothers who had been famous for a long time, White Lotus looked like a child at the moment. However, her temperament was cold and otherworldly, and she had a different kind of bearing. However, White Lotus did not seem to be in a good condition today. Her face was a little pale, and she looked a little haggard. Perfected Idle Month and Zhuoxian saw this. Perfected Idle Month looked at this little junior sister with a rare look of pity in his eyes. "Little junior sister, are you not feeling well?" White Lotus shook her head and said softly, "No, thank you for your concern, senior brother." Perfected Idle Month nodded and said, "All right, in that case, let's see Master." White Lotus agreed. Then, under the gazes of Master Xian Yu and Zhuoxian, she walked up to the ancient plate on the table. She gently brushed her palm over it, and used some unknown method. Suddenly, smoke rose from the center of the ancient plate. Then, there was the sound of a violent snowstorm. The howling was violent, as if it was right next to their ears. A vast expanse of white snow appeared on the ancient plate. This Dharma treasure was naturally the wind speech plate that was previously given to White Lotus for safekeeping. Perfected Idle Month and the other 2 looked solemn as they bowed. A moment later, a deep and slightly hoarse voice suddenly came from the depths of the seemingly endless snowstorm. "What's the matter?" Perfected Idle Month took a step forward and cupped his hands. "Master, Disciple Idle Month wishes to see Master." The snowstorm blew past as if it would never stop. The 3 could only see the snowstorm dancing in the sky, but there was no trace of a human figure. But strangely, Hakushin Jinkuan's voice was still very clear. "Speak." Perfected Idle Month did not dare to be negligent. He quickly reported to Master the major events that happened in the Kunlun party recently, including the matter of the evil cult secretly killing the odd-job disciples, which caused the anger of the other Yuanying Zhenren and caused him to fall into a somewhat embarrassing situation. At the end of his speech, Daoist Master Idle Moon's complexion turned solemn. He looked at the snowstorm in the wind whisper plate and said, "Master, given enough time, this disciple will certainly be able to get to the bottom of the devil cult. But, the sect council meeting is too close, and Qian Deng, Ming Zhu, and the others are pressing too hard. This disciple is afraid that there will be some troubles at that time. I'm here to sincerely ask Master to attend again this year, so as to deter the rascals and prevent those people from being too arrogant." The wind speech plate was silent for a moment, and then Hakushin Jinkuan's voice was heard. "Yes." Perfected Idle Month was overjoyed and quickly bowed to thank him. Then, Hakushin Jinkuan said again, "I'm not dead yet, Qian Deng, Ming Zhu, and the others shouldn't be like this. Is junior brother Tianlan back?" Perfected Idle Month hesitated for a moment and said, "I've followed Master's instructions. Every year, 1 month before the sect council meeting, I'll specially write to Martial Uncle Tianlan, asking him to return to the mountain to discuss the important affairs of the sect. In previous years, Martial Uncle always declined, and this year is the same. He only said that Zhengxianmeng has been busy recently and may not be able to come back in time." The voice in the wind speech plate was silent for a moment, and then said, "Then let's not care about him, but the matter of the devil cult plotting against the disciples of Kunlun is indeed too arrogant. Don't you have any clues? If that's the case, then it's your fault. No wonder others are pointing fingers at you." Perfected Idle Month hurriedly said, "Master, you've misunderstood. This matter is a great insult to our Kunlun by the evildoers of the devil cult. As the sect leader, I won't just sit back and watch." Now, among the two cases, the first case of the murder of He Changsheng was strange and experienced. It was indeed difficult to investigate, but after days of continuous investigation, I've found some clues, especially the source of the cinnabar used in the murder case. With this as an opportunity, I'll be able to find the melon by following the vines. As for the second case of the murder of Zhang Ji, it happened recently, but the technique was much worse than the first case. I already have some clues. It was the work of the spies that the devil cult planted in our Kunlun. Now, once the evidence is conclusive, we'll immediately arrest them and present them to the sect." Hakushin Jinkuan's tone was cold, and said, "In times of emergency, there must be a thunderous method." Perfected Idle Month's body trembled slightly, and then he took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I understand." The sound of the wind and snow gradually subsided, and the wind speech plate also gradually returned to normal. There was no longer the scene of wind and snow in the sky. White Lotus silently walked forward, wiped the magic treasure, and put it away. Then, she turned around and nodded at Daoist Master Idle Moon and Zhuoxian. Perfected Idle Month's expression was amiable, and he smiled at White Lotus, and said, "I've troubled little Shimmy." White Lotus's expression did not change much, as if it was too cold like frost. But she still bowed slightly to this eldest Xixiang, whose age could even be her grandfather, and said, "You flatter me. If Xixiang needs anything in the future, just let me know." After saying that, she bowed to both of them, and walked out. Perfected Idle Month and Zhuoxian watched her leave. After White Lotus's figure disappeared, Perfected Idle Month suddenly frowned, and said, "I heard that although the power of the magical technique recorded in the Book of Snow is extremely great, it can also affect a cultivator's will and temperament. These days, I haven't seen little Shimmy many times, but I can feel that her temperament seems to be getting colder." Zhuoxian nodded, and said, "Probably so. This mysterious book was obtained by Master in his later years. You and I have long succeeded in our cultivation techniques, and we don't have the supreme divine ability of Master in the deity transformation realm, which allows us to do as we please, so it's not suitable for us to cultivate. On the contrary, little Shimmy should have just entered the sect, like a piece of unpolished jade, but she can directly cultivate this kind of supreme magical technique from the beginning. It's also a rare opportunity. Xian Yuzhenren nodded and said, "That's right. Junior sister is a peerless genius who was born with the 5 divine pillars. Moreover, master has been so attentively training her. Her future is really limitless. Maybe in a few decades, my position as the sect master will be taken by her." Zhuo Xian's body trembled slightly, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. After a moment, he said in surprise, "Xixiang, why do you say that? You're in the prime of your life, and you're good at governing. You should be advancing bravely, why do you need to think about these things? Besides, I think Master only accepted little Shimmy as his last disciple because he loves her talent. In any case, little Shimmy is still young, so how can she bear the responsibility of the great Kunlun lineage?" Perfected Idol Month smiled, then reached out and patted Zhuo Xian's shoulder, and said with a smile, "What Shimmy said makes sense, I was thinking too much. But Master must have made arrangements for these things, so it's not up to us to think too much." Zhuo Xian said, "Xixiang is thinking too much. I think the person Master relies on the most is still you. Otherwise, why would he hand over the heavy responsibility of the sect master to you?" Perfected Idol Month made a sound of and didn't say anything else. He just slowly walked out of the cave with his hands behind his back. Zhuo Xian looked at his back and slightly frowned, as if he was thinking about something, then he also followed him out. The next day, at the foot of Kunlun, in front of the mountain gate, an execution rack was suddenly erected. The disciples of the sect and the people in Kunwu city, who were far away, quickly received the news. In an instant, many people swarmed over and surrounded the mountain gate. There were all kinds of people in the crowd, including many itinerant cultivators and cultivators from other sects who were passing by. There were even ordinary mortals and villagers who lived in the nearby cities or villages. All of them rushed over to watch the commotion. In a hidden corner of the crowd, there were 2 men who didn't seem to attract any attention. They were Fan Tui and Chen He from the 3 Realms Demon Sect. At this moment, the 2 of them did not look good, especially Fan Tui. His face could be described as ghastly pale, and his fists were tightly clenched under his sleeves. His gaze was fixed on the person who was tied to the wooden rack. Chen He sighed softly and pulled Fan Tui with his hand without batting an eyelid. He used a little more strength in his hand. Fan Tui turned his head and looked at him. After a moment, he slowly nodded and said in a low voice, "I'm fine." Chen He was silent for a moment, then said, "We have also underestimated the Kunlun party. Thinking about it, for such a large and famous sect to be able to prosper after 5,000 years, they must have their own strengths. We should be more careful when dealing with them in the future." A hint of embarrassment flashed past Fan Tui's eyes. He didn't say anything and only clenched his teeth. At the other end of the crowd, Old Ma was also standing in the crowd. Strangely, Lu Chen, who was dressed in casual clothes, was also standing beside him. However, the 2 of them didn't show any signs of conversation. It was as if they were 2 strangers who didn't know each other. They didn't even look to the side. Their gazes were also looking at the execution rack at the foot of the mountain gate, looking at the person who was tied to it. Looking from afar, that person's limbs were tied up, and his head hung limply in front of his chest. There were many bloodstains on his clothes, and he looked a little wretched. From time to time, whispers could be heard from the surrounding crowd. Old Ma stared for a moment, then suddenly said as if he was talking to himself, "I remember that the Kunlun party had also captured many spies from the Devil sect in the past, but they had never done it in public like this, right?" His voice wasn't loud, and probably only Lu Chen, who was standing a few feet away from him, could hear him. However, Lu Chen's expression didn't change at all, as if he didn't have any reaction to the fatty's words. It was only after a while that Lu Chen let out a faint smile. Without turning his head, he said in a low voice, "That sect leader must have been forced into a corner recently." Old Ma grunted, a hint of disapproval in his eyes. Just as he was about to say something, there was a commotion in the surrounding crowd. The 2 of them looked over and saw a person walking out from among the Kunlun party disciples at the Kunlun mountain gate. That person had a dignified aura, and his footsteps were steady. It was He. At this moment, he was holding a sharp longsword in his hand, walking toward the execution rack step by step. The surrounding crowd instantly became excited. He stopped in front of the execution rack and suddenly looked around. Then, he shouted in a deep voice that shook the entire place and reverberated in front of the Kunlun Mountain Gate, "Spies from the Devil's Sect have committed heinous crimes. Everyone has the right to punish them." Chapter 209. He's loud shout was like a clap of thunder, instantly silencing the entire place. Countless gazes landed on the sharp longsword that was as bright as autumn water in his hand. In the crowd, Fan Tui and Chen He's expressions turned extremely ugly. On the other side of the crowd, Old Ma frowned and shook his head. While everyone's attention was attracted by He, Old Ma glanced to the side and was suddenly stunned. He saw a strange expression on Lu Chen's face. There seemed to be a sudden blankness on his face. His mouth was still tightly shut, and his eyes flickered with uncertainty. He stared blankly at the execution rack in the distance. His gaze only stopped on the evil sect spy who had already completely lost the ability to resist and had become the prey of others. A wave of cheers suddenly erupted from the surrounding crowd. At first, it was those mortal villagers without any cultivation. Their feelings were the simplest and most direct. Their hatred towards the evil sect was the most straightforward. After He shouted, these mortals quickly started cursing. They cursed the person who was tied up to 18 generations of his ancestors. Some even threw a large pile of rocks, junk and rubbish. Then, it was the cultivators in the crowd. Those rogue cultivators with the lowest cultivation were a little agitated. There were also noises. The rest of the people would be quiet for a while, but most of them were watching coldly from the sidelines. They definitely did not have any intention to disturb. Those clamorous and crazy cursing voices reverberated nearby. Lu Chen stood in the crowd. His expression gradually turned indifferent. He then stared deeply at the person who was about to die. Old Ma seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed slightly. He wanted to speak but stopped. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He then sighed softly. But in the end, he did not do anything. Or maybe he could not do anything. The whistling sound of the drums was like a tidal wave, surging forward violently. It could be seen that the evil cult's malicious reputation had already penetrated deep into the hearts of the people of the world, coming wave after wave from all directions to the scene. He stood under the execution rack, a strange feeling welled up in his heart at this moment. Towards the evildoer of the evil cult behind him, he of course did not have any sympathy. In reality, his hatred with the evil cult was as deep as the sea, and because he had been investigating this matter for the past few days, he was arranged to come here today to personally kill the evil person. But no matter what, the evil cult spy who was tied to the execution rack did not have any power to fight back. After being caught yesterday, the Kunlun party did not treat him politely. After forcing him to say everything that he should know, what awaited him was today's ending. Perhaps in the past, the Kunlun party would have been merciful enough to lock up such people, but this time, the order passed down from above was unusually decisive and fierce. Nobody questioned this order, even that Yuanyingzhenren who often disagreed with Reverend Idle Month these few days did not dare to question it. The time is right, the evil cult evildoer has forced our Kunlun too far, Kunlun will definitely not be lenient. He coldly laughed, but in his heart, he did not feel too pleased with himself. With his knowledge and current skills, he did not feel that standing here today would be a particularly glorious thing. But the ones who arranged for him to come here were the sect leader Zhenren and his teacher. He had to come. They probably felt that this was for their own good, they could vent their resentment, or maybe they could increase their reputation in front of the crowd. He's expression was cold and indifferent, yet he laughed with ridicule in his heart. For some unknown reason, another extremely tall figure had suddenly appeared in his mind at this moment, and it was like an insurmountable mountain, like the lofty Kunlun mountains. He closed his eyes to compose himself, then indifferently extended his sharp sword and placed it across the neck of the evil cult spy. In an instant, the surrounding crowd was in an uproar. Everyone widened their eyes and looked at the point where the sharp sword connected with the flesh, anticipating the moment when blood splattered. Blood seemed to always be able to stimulate the hearts of people. It had never been the same since ancient times. In the corner of the crowd, Chen He's eyes were slightly closed, his lips moving slightly, as though he was softly reciting some scripture. Fan Tui, on the other hand, had a cold gaze and stared at He's face like a sharp sword. Further away, Old Ma looked at Lu Chen with a hint of worry in his eyes. Lu Chen's breathing was a little hurried, the corners of his eyes twitching slightly. Everything seemed to be waiting for that moment. In front of the mountain gate of Kunlun, all sounds suddenly disappeared. It was silent. Everyone held their breath and stared, waiting for the arrival of death. The long sword suddenly shone brightly. It was bright and dazzling, like a brilliant ray of sunset in autumn. It was also like a willow leaf that floated past in spring. It was beautiful but brief, flashing across the sky. That person's head was lifted up by the long sword and was seen by the world. That face was young and handsome. There were traces of blood and he looked a little haggard. His eyebrows, his eyes, his mouth, and his ears were no different from those of an ordinary person. He seemed to have been unconscious all this while. However, perhaps the coldness of the long sword had woken him up, or perhaps the roaring curses had woken him up. The young man suddenly opened his eyes. The first thing that was reflected in his eyes was the dazzling radiance of the sword. The image of the sharp sword filled his eyes, and the entire world turned cold. In that instant, he seemed to have suddenly seen everything around him clearly. The sharp sword, the execution rack, and the countless onlookers. In that instant, his entire body seemed to tremble, and there was an unconcealable fear in him. However, when the radiance of the sword swept across the sky and landed on him, the young man suddenly quietened down. He laughed out loud. He tried his best to raise his head and look at the clear and bright sky. The sky was blue, and it was like a gentle gaze. At the same time, it was like a boundless ocean. The waves were about to drown him and merge his body into the clear sky. The young man's face suddenly lit up. It was as if he had seen a magnificent scenery. The crowd was in an uproar, and they were all shocked. Chen He and Fan Tui's bodies trembled at the same time. There was shock on their faces, and a glint of tears flashed past Fan Tui's eyes. In the distance, Lu Chen suddenly took a step forward. His expression was a little twisted. However, at that moment, a hand suddenly reached out from the side and grabbed him. That hand was plump and warm, and it was as strong as iron. Lu Chen immediately quietened down and lowered his head. The descent of a true god, the unification of the three realms, the young man suddenly shouted at the top of his lungs. His voice was as shrill as a cicada in autumn, and it shook people's hearts. However, after a moment, all the sounds stopped. It stopped at the bright radiance of the sword. He calmly swung his sword, chopping off the young man's head. The decapitated head landed on the ground and rolled forward for a while. Following that, fresh blood spurted out and splattered all over the place. It was so red that it was glaring and suffocating. There was a look of disgust in He's eyes. He retreated and avoided the spurt of fresh blood. Then, he slowly turned around, faced the crowd, and raised his sword. Drops of blood dripped down from the blade of the sword. It dyed the ground and the eyes of the people in the surroundings red. Ah! A wave of cheers erupted from the crowd. Laughter and shocked cries mixed together. Coupled with the countless faces with different expressions, it was like a painting of the world. When one looked at the scene of fresh blood with a tinge of bloodiness, it was like a painting of 100 ghosts at night. The gazes of many people landed on He. With awe and envy. He took 2 steps forward and said in a clear voice, this bastard is a spy of the devil cult. He secretly sneaked into our Kunlun school. He has been scheming and has committed many evil deeds. Just a few days ago, he became even more ferocious and plotted to kill Jianghu, a disciple of our Kunlun school. The brutality of his methods is truly outrageous. At this point, He Yi's voice became much lower. He looked around at the countless people around him and said, "When I saw Junior Marshal Brother Zhang's corpse that day, I only had 4 words, too horrible to look at. The evildoer of the devil cult has committed all kinds of evil deeds. Although the heaven and earth have the virtue of cherishing life, our Kunwa disciples will never die in vain. Our Kunlun party will never allow such evildoers to do whatever they want in our school. Today's punishment is our Kunlun party enforcing justice on behalf of the heaven." This last sentence was said with a sonorous tone and imposing manner. For a moment, everyone turned to look at He Yi, who casually tossed his sharp sword into the air. He then turned around and strode away, heading straight for Kunlun Mountain. Behind him, there was a sudden sound of wind. The sound was sharp and the sound of the air being torn apart instantly became urgent. The long sword descended from the sky like a sharp blade of the heavens. It was unstoppable and went straight into the torture rack. With a poof, it pierced into the chest of the corpse and came out. The crowd was silent for a moment. Suddenly, a deafening cheer erupted. Countless people were cheering for him, especially the mortals who had no cultivation. They were extremely excited and shouted with all their might. Fan Tui, who was in the crowd, was so angry that his entire body was trembling. He gritted his teeth and forcefully suppressed the roar in his heart. He used the softest voice he could muster to shout angrily to Chen He, who was beside him, "This bastard. I must kill this person." Chen He nodded slowly. His eyes also looked toward the back of Kunlun Mountain with a cold gaze. That day, the Kunlun party publicly executed a traitor of the evil sect. They announced that it was this person who had plotted against and killed their servant, Jianghu. It had only been a few days since Jianghu's death. The Kunlun party's thunderous and iron-blooded determination shook the mountains and rivers. The blood-stained torture rack was erected outside of Kunlun Mountain. It was not taken down for many days, and no one collected the corpse of the evil sect's demon. After this incident, the atmosphere in the Kunlun party suddenly changed. Jinren Idle Month's reputation soared, and the voices of criticism immediately decreased. Xian Deng, Ming Zhu, and the rest of the Yuanying Jinren also expressed their appreciation for this. They praised Jinren Idle Month's methods and said that he was a great talent with deep foresight and decisiveness. This was a blessing for the entire Kunlun party. On the night of that day, when the moon rose once again, the sky was dark. Lu Chen sat alone on the cliff of the Flying Goose platform. He looked up at the cold and lonely moon with a cold expression. He thought to himself, there are only 4 days left until the night of the full moon. Chapter 210. Su Qingjun walked back to Fian Terrace from the mountain path in the early morning after daybreak. When she was about to walk towards her cave residence, she hesitated and glanced at the other side of Fian Terrace. The wooden house stood quietly in the morning light. Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she still walked over. Just as she was about to knock on the door, she seemed to suddenly remember something. She looked at the sky, where the sun had yet to rise, and lowered her raised hand. She stood at the door for a moment and was about to turn around to leave when she suddenly heard a voice calling out to her from the cliff of Fian Terrace. Su Qingjun was startled and turned her head to look. She saw Lu Chen sitting with his back against the stone wall on the other side of the cliff, waving at her with a smile. Su Qingjun walked over and looked at Lu Chen with a trace of surprise. "Why are you here?" Lu Chen pointed at the vast sea of clouds below the cliff and said, "I suddenly thought of something last night. I've lived here for so long, and I've seen quite a few sunsets, but I've never seen a sunrise here." Su Qingjun sighed and looked at the sun that was about to rise on the horizon. She said, "What's so good about a sunrise?" Lu Chen glanced at her and said with a smile, "What's wrong? You don't seem to be in a good mood." Su Qingjun shook her head and wanted to say something but stopped. Then she suddenly saw a wet patch on Lu Chen's shoulder from the corner of her eye. She then saw that there was a drop of dew on the tip of his hair that was leaning against the stone wall. She couldn't help but be startled. She said, "What happened? You actually sat here all night?" Lu Chen followed her gaze and glanced at his shoulder. He then smiled and said, "Yes, I couldn't sleep last night and wanted to see the sunrise, so I just ran over. Do you want to come over and sit? The scenery here is very good." As he said this, he even patted the ground beside him. Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she sat down beside him. The two of them sat side by side as the mountain breeze blew past. Under the morning light, they could see the white clouds rolling up and down like waves. A round red sun shone brightly in all directions. After a night of dormancy, it finally rose slowly. The golden light illuminated the heaven and earth. At that moment, the world seemed to be filled with dazzling light. Su Qingjun gazed into the distance with a look of pleasant surprise on her face. She said sincerely, "Ah, the sunrise is so beautiful." Lu Chen also gazed into the distance and said, "Yes. But you've lived here for so long, have you really never seen this scenery before?" Su Qingjun suddenly blushed. She retracted her gaze and glanced at him, saying, "No. Oh, sometimes, I wake up late." Lu Chen said seriously, "Sometimes?" Su Qingjun suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She glared at him and said, "Hey, in any case, I'm your master in name." "Even if it's in name," Lu Chen said with a smile, "so I can't say it?" Su Qingjun looked at him for a while and suddenly sighed, saying, "Forget it, say whatever you want. Anyway, all these years, you're the only one who would talk to me so casually. In fact, sometimes when I think about it, it doesn't seem to be a big deal." Lu Chen's eyes lit up. He said with a smile, "You really don't mind? Then I can tell others later. If you dare to say it, I'll break your legs." Su Qingjun grabbed his sleeve and said fiercely. Lu Chen laughed and nodded in agreement. Su Qingjun just pretended to be fierce, but then she also smiled and burst out laughing. She was as bright and beautiful as a spring flower. Then, she sighed softly and put her hands behind her head. She leaned against the stone wall and looked at the vast sea of clouds in the distance. She narrowed her eyes slightly and said to herself, "You're still smart. Sitting here and watching the sunrise, it's really leisurely and comfortable." Lu Chen smiled and turned to look at her. He said, "Is there something troubling at home again?" Su Qingjun closed her eyes and made a sound. After a while, she said softly, "My brother's head might not recover." Lu Chen frowned and said, "So serious?" Su Qingjun nodded and said, "My family has invited many highly skilled seniors to take a look, including my master. I also begged to go take a look, but there was no good way. Sumo is good and bad now. When he is good, he looks like a normal person, eating and sleeping by himself. But when he is bad, he is completely like a fool." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, "It sounds like his brain is hurt." Su Qingjun said, "Yes. That's why the seniors who came to take a look were also at a loss. They could only try to give him all the miraculous pills and medicines they could find, but it was of no use. Because of this, my father has lost a lot of weight. My mother is so anxious that her hair has turned white. She cries all day." Lu Chen did not know what to say for a moment. He did not have the slightest good impression of Sumo, whose brain was injured by the mind-manipulating art. But he always felt that the Su Qingjun in front of him was somewhat different. Looking at her somewhat depressed appearance, Lu Chen also felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. After a moment, Su Qingjun suddenly sneered and said, "Yesterday at the mountain gate, you should know about it, right?" Lu Chen slightly looked up at her, nodded and said, I went over to take a look. Su Qingjun said, that he Xixiang, is he very awe-inspiring? Lu Chen said, very awe-inspiring. Su Qingjun indifferently said, now with a shake of his body, he only went to kill a powerless evil sect spy and suddenly became the hero that sect leader Reverend and Dukanjinren strongly promoted. This kind of person, even if our Su family wants to take revenge, we won't dare to. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, yes, you better bear with it. Su Qingjun stared blankly at that rising red sun. After a long while, she said, sometimes I really feel that it's quite boring. Lu Chen said, what about those people who were harmed by your brother, do they also feel that it's boring? Su Qingjun was surprised, her brows immediately frowned and turned to look at Lu Chen, her eyes somewhat gloomy. Lu Chen smiled and calmly said, I'm sorry, I just don't know how to chat, sometimes my words are just unpleasant to hear. Su Qingjun looked deeply at him and suddenly said, I thought that at this time you will at least comfort me a few words, at least accompany me to talk, to make me happier. Why? Lu Chen looked at her beautiful face and said, is it because you think that because you are a natural beauty, a man should coax you, or because you think that because you have done me a great kindness, I should wholeheartedly flatter you, or have you forgotten that I was also harmed by that brother of yours? Su Qingjun stared at him and slowly said, you, still hate him? Should I not hate him? Lu Chen said. Those torture tools hidden in the courtyard, I think you should know in your heart that I will not be the first person to experience those painful feelings. Su Qingjun slightly lowered her eyes, at that moment avoiding his gaze, and softly said, I thought that if I treat you a bit better, you will, slightly forget that hatred. You are wrong, Lu Chen said calmly. Su Qingjun fell silent. After a while, she stood up and turned to walk down, but after 2 steps, she suddenly stopped and did not turn around. He only heard her say, you have never spoken to me like this in the past. When I just arrived here, you asked me what was on my mind. In fact, I should be the one asking you, right? Su Qingjun slowly turned around, there was a soft light in her bright eyes, looking at Lu Chen, and said, what happened during the days I was not on the mountain, Lu Chen? Nothing. Lu Chen said, it's just that I don't want to flatter you anymore. I feel that I have been very disgusting in thinking about you all day to make you happy. Su Qingjun's face looked a bit pale, and she whispered, why? No reason. In fact, the two of us do not have to be so hypocritical. Do we really pretend that we can always be friends? Are we not? Nope. Lu Chen's face seemed to become calmer and calmer, calmer to the point that it was close to indifference. Even his gaze was cold, the coldness in his eyes seeped into his bones. I follow you, of course because of your beautiful appearance, and also because of your profound skills, I can rely on you. In the future, I can rely on your name to get by and swindle food and drink. As for you, you probably feel a little guilty taking care of me, and also because I can make you happy, right? Su Qingjun looked a bit sad, lightly shook her head, and said, it's not like that. Lu Chen became a bit impatient, waved his hand at her, and said, anyway, that's what I think. Do you know how much I have suffered in the hands of that brother of yours? But every day when you come back, you only talk about his name. Hearing it makes my heart feel annoyed. I think, in the end, we are still 2 different people. Most likely we can't be friends. You are the #1 genius of the Kunlun party, Jin Dan Friar, how can you really look up to a good-for-nothing odd-job disciple like me? Su Qingjun suddenly raised her head, and said, I did not, after a long time, can you guarantee that you definitely won't? Su Qingjun was suddenly at a loss for words. Lu Chen stood up, took one last look at that red sun at the end of the sea of clouds, sighed, and then walked towards the wooden house at the bottom of the cliff. When he passed by Su Qingjun, he paused for a moment, and said, I don't want to stay here anymore, I will go down the mountain today, I don't want to trouble you in the future. Can I ask you to cancel the title of Master in name? Su Qingju nodded blankly, her expression complicated, lightly gritting her teeth. She watched as Lu Chen returned to the wooden house, and not long after, he came out with a small package, and then walked with large strides towards the mountain path. He didn't say anything, didn't say goodbye, looked like he was going to directly go far away like this. Looking at that man's back, Su Qingju suddenly shouted loudly, and said, "I didn't look down on you. I have always treated you as a friend." The footsteps of the person going down the mountain paused for a moment, but in the end he still didn't turn back. He only stretched out a hand and waved in the wind, as if bidding farewell to the past period of time, and then he walked with large strides down this hill. Chapter 211. The path down the mountain was not easy to walk on. Zigzagging, it was as if he was always walking on a steep slope with no flat ground. There was no one on the nearby mountain path, and the flying goose platform was usually quiet. Lu Chen walked alone for a long time. After leaving the flying goose platform, he walked around casually, as if he did not have a clear and definite direction to go. He was like a cold and lonely shadow, walking in the mountains until a deep voice suddenly rang in his ear and said gently, "Where are you going?" Lu Chen stopped and said, "I'm waiting for you." The person seemed to smile. Then, he heard the sound of the wind and the rustling of the trees on both sides of the mountain path. The light from the sky seemed to be twisted for a moment, refracting a strange rainbow in front of him. A huge and burly figure appeared behind Lu Chen. In the next moment, the two of them had already left the mountain path and arrived at a quiet neighboring forest. Lu Chen stood in the forest and looked around. He mumbled something, but no one knew what he was saying. Then, he looked up at the opposite side and said, "Damn Baldy, do you have wine?" Whoosh! A wine gourd was thrown over in mid-air. Lu Chen caught it, pulled out the cork, and gulped it down. Then, he wiped his mouth and lamented, "What kind of lousy wine is this? You're a divine transformation stage true lord after all. Can't you get some immortal wine that can extend your life by 10 years? Get lost." True Lord Tianlan, who looked taller than Lu Chen even though he was sitting in the forest, spat at him. Then, with a wave of his hand, the wine gourd flew back and landed in his hand. True Lord Tianlan touched the wine gourd and seemed to cherish it. He said, "There's no such thing in the world. Besides, you're the only one in the world who can drink my wine. Be content." Lu Chen did not look proud or honored at all. He snorted and found a place in front of Perfected Lord Tianlan to sit down. Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at him and the corners of his lips curled up into a strange smile. "You suddenly fell out with Su Qingju and went down the mountain. Isn't that a little strange?" Lu Chen said lightly, "I don't like the entire Su family, okay?" Perfected Lord Tianlan replied, "Sure, of course. Let's not talk about how angry you are right now. In the future, when I'm done with all those trivial matters, I'll definitely help you torture the Su family and help you vent your anger, okay?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I will take revenge myself. You don't have to worry about my business." Perfected Lord Tianlan sighed. "Nonsense. Are you afraid that I'll go to Soaring Goose platform?" Lu Chen fell silent for a moment before replying, "You're going to look for me sooner or later anyway. Once I'm involved in a bunch of trivial matters, I won't be able to get out of it. There's no need for me to harm others." Perfected Lord Tianlan could not help but laugh. "Seems like you don't trust me. Also, this is the first time I've seen you feeling compassion for someone. Why? You fallen for that lady?" Lu Chen shook his head. "It's not that. Initially, I wanted to go to Soaring Goose platform to find the traitor. However, that person doesn't look like one and she's passable, so I let it go. In any case, the truth will be revealed in 3 days." Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him and his expression gradually turned solemn. "Are you so sure?" Lu Chen replied, that pattern is the highest level of the demonic cult in the three realms. It can't be faked unless it's someone like me who has been in the demonic cult for many years. Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't question him any further. He nodded and said, "All right." Then, he smiled and said, "I didn't sneak back all the way here in vain." Lu Chen raised his head and looked at him. "Sneak?" Perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled. "That's right. Right now, not many people in the Kunlun party know that I'm back. Don't go out and spread it." Lu Chen replied, "Even if I say it, someone has to believe me. Even if I run to the mountain gate and shout that the damn fatty is back, not only will they not believe me, they might even beat me up." Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed out loud. "See, this is the benefit of having many disciples and grand disciples." Lu Chen scoffed. "What disciples and grand disciples do you have? You don't even have a single disciple, right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. "Isn't it just you?" Lu Chen turned his head away and did not look at him. He asked, "If the traitor is indeed lured out to meet me on the night of the full moon, what should I do then?" Perfected Lord Tianlan replied without hesitation, "Capture him, of course." Lu Chen asked, "Who's going to do it?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. "Isn't that why I rushed back? Don't worry, I'll hide near you. Once the traitor appears, I'll naturally take him down." Lu Chen stared at him for a while. "That's it? Unless he doesn't come." Perfected Lord Tianlan shrugged. Leaves fell from the forest and landed between Perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at the half-withered leaves. After a while, he suddenly said, "I have something to ask you." "Yes, old Ma has mentioned this to me before." "Go ahead and ask." Lu Chen looked up at Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes. "Why are the people of the fiend cult like us? They don't seem to know about the traitor that's hidden the deepest in Kunlun Mountain." "I don't know." Lu Chen's expression darkened. "What do you mean by that?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "I really don't know. I'm not a shadow that stays in the fiend cult all day long like you. I'm indeed not too clear about the internal affairs of the fiend cult over the years. I understand what you mean. However, don't forget that I'm a soul formation perfected lord, not a fraud. There are many things that I'm not omniscient about." Lu Chen looked at him quietly and said, "I think it's a little strange." Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes fell on his face for a moment. Then, he smiled and said, "So, you secretly tracked down the second spy of the fiend cult and then revealed the identity of that person to Idle Month through Old Ma?" Lu Chen said lightly, "That guy is an idiot. He doesn't care about hiding at all. Not to mention me, even an experienced person in Fuyunji can find him directly." Perfected Lord Tianlan grinned and said, "So that person is dead?" Lu Chen looked down. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "Good. All the people of the fiend cult should be killed." He looked sincere and said to Tianlan, "You did really well this time," Perfected Lord Tianlan said. "I didn't misjudge you. You're the only one in the world who can find such a well-hidden spy of the fiend cult." Lu Chen said, "But I haven't caught him yet." Perfected Lord Tianlan paused and said with a smile, "It'll be soon. It'll only take a few days." "Oh." Lu Chen thought for a while and suddenly asked him, "But I killed a servant disciple of the Kunlun party this time. Don't you blame me for killing good people?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Do you think that he Changsheng is a good person?" Lu Chen wanted to say something but stopped. After thinking for a while, he shook his head and said, "I'm not sure." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "I don't blame you because I trust you." He said with some emotion, "Back then, when you sneaked into the devil cult alone, it was a real dragon's pool and tiger's den. Under those circumstances, I could trust you for many years. Today, on this Mount Kunlun, why wouldn't I trust you?" Lu Chen nodded. After a while, he said, okay. On the night of the full moon, I'll wait for you in the dense forest at the foot of the mountain. Lu Chen said. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, don't worry about me. Just go there by yourself. I'll hide in the dark and show up to catch the spy when necessary. Lu Chen frowned and said, don't tell the other people of the Kunlun party. For example, Immortal Idol Month, the head of the sect? Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, not for now, in case there are too many people talking, right? Lu Chen nodded slowly. After pondering for a moment, he said, what if we find out that the spy is an important figure in the Kunlun party? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, isn't that even better? It means that we've caught a big fish and we're not afraid of anyone. Lu Chen said, even if it's perfected Yuanying? Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, what perfected Yuanying can compare to me? Don't worry, I'll catch one for you when the time comes. What about someone more powerful? Lu Chen asked. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and said, what do you mean? Lu Chen said, can you catch someone more powerful than perfected Yuanying? Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression turned serious for the first time. He looked at Lu Chen and said, you mean my senior brother Bai Chen? Lu Chen said indifferently, can you catch a soul formation perfected lord for me as well? Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly laughed and shook his head. Do you have any proof? Lu Chen said, no, I'm just talking nonsense. Let's see how you're going to answer me. That's impossible. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, as a soul formation perfected lord of the Kunlun party, he has nothing. How can he be an elder of the fiend cult who is like a stray dog? Do you think he's stupid? Lu Chen looked at him for a while and nodded. You're right. It can't be Hakushin Jinkuan. Is there anything else? If not, I'm leaving, Perfected Lord Tianlan said to Lu Chen, we've said everything that needs to be said. Can I really turn over a new leaf after I catch that fiend cult spy? Lu Chen asked. Of course, Perfected Lord Tianlan said with certainty. Lu Chen nodded and said, then let me ask you for one more thing. Say it. Collect the corpse of that fiend cult spy at the foot of the mountain. Otherwise, if one day his head is separated from his body and his corpse is exposed on the streets, it will look a little tragic. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and looked at Lu Chen. Are you pleading for that fiend cult spy? Yes, Lu Chen replied calmly. Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment and said, didn't you secretly find this person? I want to collect his corpse, can I? Lu Chen asked again as if he did not hear Perfected Lord Tianlan's words and did not seem to care about Perfected Lord Tianlan's gradually darkening expression. Chapter 212. No, Perfected Lord Tianlan said. Don't be meddlesome. Lu Chen quietened down. After a while, he nodded without saying anything. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him and frowned. Ma Xiaoyun is right. You do seem to be a little off lately. Because I want to collect that person's corpse? Because your heart softened. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, 10 years ago, you weren't soft-hearted or hesitant. You didn't care about other people's feelings or worry about dragging them down. I think I told you a long time ago that shadows like you don't live long. Lu Chen was silent. After a while, he said, you're right. I've probably changed in the past 10 years. Why? You don't like it? Perfected Lord Tianlan said, of course I don't like it because you might lose your life. But I think it's all right. Lu Chen said calmly, although my heart softened and my cultivation was crippled, I saw things that I never saw before and felt a state of mind that I never knew before. I think it's all good. Lu Chen looked up at the famous Perfected Lord in front of him and said, actually, sometimes I also wonder if I would still stab Yun Shouyang to death without hesitation if I was in that desolate valley now. Perfected Lord Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Lu Chen. Why? Do you think what you did 10 years ago was wrong? Lu Chen shook his head. No, I don't regret it. After a pause, he said, You're right. I was probably soft-hearted. A shadow shouldn't be soft-hearted. I think I'm not suitable to be a shadow anymore. The forest quieted down. After a while, Perfected Lord Tianlan said, It's been hard on you all these years. Fortunately, you'll be free after this matter is done. Lu Chen smiled. Really? Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed. Why would I lie to you? You're my only disciple and I'm counting on you to inherit my legacy in the future. Oh, speaking of this, my lineage has a habit. Every generation's patriarch will pass on one of his Daoist titles to his favorite disciple, which will then be passed down from generation to generation. My master is old ancestor Tian Hong. He imparted the Daoist name, Tian, to me, so I'm called Tian Lan. In the future, I will also pass on the word Tian to you, Lu Chen, Perfected Lord Tianlan said to Lu Chen with a smile. Lu Chen shrugged and said, Then what should I be called, Lu Tian? Tian Chen? Lu Tian Chen? It doesn't sound imposing at all. It doesn't sound good. Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a moment and said, How about Heavenly Shadow? Sky Shadow? Lu Chen repeated. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled. How is it? I think it's pretty good. Forget it, don't talk to me about this. Otherwise, I'll be entangled with a shadow for the rest of my life. Damn Baldy, let's make a deal. This is the last time. Lu Chen said to Perfected Lord Tianlan with a smile. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. Yes, it's the last time. But this name is really not bad. Think about it again, huh? Amidst the laughter, he stood up. His wide sleeves fluttered like floating clouds. A strong gust of wind blew and the fallen leaves danced in the air. The entire forest rustled. Suddenly, birds flew up in alarm. His figure flashed and disappeared without a trace. In the depths of the forest, only Lu Chen was left. He looked at the strong gale and his expression suddenly turned strange, as though he was thinking about something. After a while, he muttered to himself, Old ancestor Tian Hong's favorite disciple didn't take over the Kunlun party, amidst the clouds in the sky, on the winter peak. Amidst the howling wind and snow, White Lotus and Zhuo Xian stood in front of the wind speech disc that had been opened once again. They looked at the violent wind and snow inside and then heard Hakushin Jinkuan's voice from the depths of the wind and snow. Lian, leave the wind speech disc with your second senior brother for the next few days. There are many important matters of the sect that require him to contact me from time to time. You're still young, so don't be distracted. Just focus on cultivating in the cave abode. White Lotus lowered her head slightly and said calmly, Yes, I understand. Go. I'll take my leave. White Lotus bowed to the wind speech disc and then nodded at Zhuo Xian. Zhuo Xian smiled and then White Lotus turned and walked out. Zhuo Xian was the only one left in the cave abode. After a while, Hakushin Jinkuan's voice was heard again, How's Lian's cultivation recently? Zhuo Xian said, Junior sister is a genius. Her cultivation progress is extremely fast and has long surpassed me when I was her age. I'm really ashamed of my inferiority. Hakushin Jinkuan's voice sounded like he was in a good mood. He even smiled and said, Yes, Lian was born with 5 pillars of bone. Her cultivation is indeed better than ordinary people. But she's still young and has a long road ahead of her. As her senior brother, you have to take care of her from time to time. Zhuo Xian cupped his hands and said, Yes, I understand. Hakushin Jinkuan asked again, How's the situation in the sect? Zhuo Xian said, Everything is fine now. The day before yesterday, Senior Brother Idol Month resolutely ordered the execution of the devil cult spies. His thunderous measures deterred everyone. Those rumors have decreased a lot these days. Hakushin Jinkuan sneered and said, "Those troublemakers are just people who look fierce but are weak inside. Even if they cultivate to Yuanying, they won't be able to achieve anything big. Now the only one the sect has to worry about is my junior brother Tianlan. As long as he doesn't return to the mountain, there won't be any big trouble." Zhuo Xian's eyes flashed. He lowered his voice and said, "Master, do you mean that martial uncle Tianlan is dissatisfied with eldest senior brother? The person he's dissatisfied with is probably me." Hakushin Jinkuan seemed to be in a good mood today. He did not hide anything from his second disciple and said lightly, "But it doesn't matter. As long as I'm here, he can't do anything." Zhuo Xian bowed his head deeply and said respectfully, "Master is wise. I'll meditate and practice. But since I promised Idle Month, I'll still go to the sect council on his behalf that night. You can come to me then." "Yes." The sound of the wind and snow gradually subsided and gradually disappeared. The wind speech plate also quieted down and returned to its usual quiet appearance. Zhuo Xian walked forward and gently put away the magic treasure. He seemed to be in deep thought. This night, when the moon rose, a figure swept from the night sky and landed on Fian platform. The moonlight shone coldly on the left and right, and the platform looked empty. The man was about to go to the cave residence on the mountain wall to call the door when he suddenly exclaimed and turned to look at the other side. He saw a woman not far away from the wooden house. It was Su Qingjun. She was standing there looking up at the moon, lost in thought. The man walked over and deliberately increased his pace. Su Qingjun immediately felt the movement behind her. She turned her head and was stunned at first. Then she called out, "Master, why are you here?" The man was Masato Kihara, the leader of the Kunlun party. He walked to Su Qingjun and looked around. Finally, his eyes fell on Su Qingjun's face. He said with some surprise, "What are you doing here?" Su Qingjun said, "Tonight's night is not bad. The moonlight shone on the sea of clouds. It is quite magnificent. I wanted to come over and take a look." Masato Kihara rolled his eyes and said, "You have lived here for a few years. You should be tired of it." Su Qingjun was silent for a moment and said, "No. I was immersed in cultivation for the past few years. After I came back, I often hid in the cave residence. If no one told me about the surrounding scenery, the sun rising and the moon setting, the sea of clouds and so on, I really did not look at it seriously." Masato Kihara looked at the sea of clouds in the distance. Under the moonlight, the sea of clouds shimmered with silver light. It was like the waves of the sea. It was very beautiful. He nodded and said, "Yes, we cultivators sometimes need to understand the nature of heaven and earth. Although this state can only be understood by cultivators above the realm of Yuanying, but for a genius with extraordinary talent like you, it is beneficial for your cultivation to understand more in the realm of Jindan." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Yes, disciple understands." She looked at Masato Kihara and said, "Master, you came here tonight. Is there something you need me for?" Masato Kihara did not look at the sea of clouds. After a moment of hesitation, he said to Su Qingjun, "Yes, tonight I went to see an old friend. I passed by here on my way back to the mountain. I wanted to come down to see you and have a chat with you." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Oh. Master, please wait for a moment. I will go get some spiritual tea. We can enjoy the moonlight together." Masato Kihara waved her hand and said, "I don't want to drink. The taste of the tea is too bland. I will drink my own wine." As he spoke, he took out a flask of wine out of nowhere and stuffed it into his mouth before gulping down a few mouthfuls. Su Qingjun couldn't help but laugh. She shook her head and said nothing. Masato Kihara drank the wine and let out a satisfied sigh. "Qingjun, you have been my disciple for so many years. Do you have any regrets?" "Regret?" Su Qingjun was taken aback. She said in astonishment, "Master, why would you say that? I have never regretted it. It is all thanks to your guidance that I can improve day by day. How could I have any other thoughts?" Masato Kihara smiled and said, "Yes, you are a good child." As he spoke, he drank another mouthful of wine and continued, "But I think you know what's going on in our Kunlun sect. Our Taiji has been declining for many years, and there are still many areas where we suffer losses. Although I've tried my best to help you fight for it, sometimes it's inevitable that there will be times when we can't do it well. I'm afraid that you'll be wronged because of your talent." Su Qingjun smiled and said, "Master, you think too much. I am very good." Masato Kihara stared at Su Qingjun's beautiful face and suddenly smiled. He said, "Yes, you are really a good child. But don't worry, there will be a day in the future when Master will properly train you and let you be like all the other geniuses in the sect. You will be able to display your strengths and make our Tetsu branch flourish." As he spoke, he seemed to be a little excited. He unconsciously exerted force in his hand and directly crushed the wine bottle with a muffled sound. The wine splashed out. Under the moonlight, the countless water droplets in the air refracted a magnificent and strange rainbow, as if leading to the distant depths of the night. Chapter 213. In the dead of night, the bright moon hung high in the sky. Outside Kunwu City, in a nameless mountain forest. Hurried screams and desperate running mixed together, piercing through the silence of the mountain forest, creating ripples in the darkness like water. A black shadow rushed out of the forest. It was a huge black bear. Under the moonlight, one could see that the fur on its body, chest, and back was already covered with a hard, plate-like skin. It was very different from ordinary bears. Obviously, it was a ferocious beast that had already advanced to become a demonic beast. Demonic beasts like this might not be considered high in rank, but their fighting strength couldn't be underestimated. Their strength was often several times greater than that of ordinary beasts, and their temperaments were even more ferocious, making them very difficult to provoke. In an ordinary mountain forest, this kind of demonic beast was enough to occupy a mountain or a forest, becoming the king of beasts in this area. But in this dark night, this black bear demonic beast looked somewhat panicked. There was fear in its eyes as it ran forward with all its might. It seemed as if it wished it could grow wings and fly as fast as possible, leaving this dark mountain forest as quickly as possible. While this demonic beast was madly running away, the moonlit mountain forest was cold and silent. Not a single sound dared to be heard. All the beasts, including the birds, seemed to be doing their best to hide their auras, not daring to make any sound. Suddenly, the moonlight shining on the horizon darkened and a cold wind blew in the darkness of the night. A strange aura blew from the depths of the forest to the left of this black bear demonic beast. The black bear roared, but the sound of the wind suddenly became fierce. Like a thunderclap, a black shadow blocked the moonlight in the sky and covered the black bear's shadow. Roar! The black bear let out a crazy and desperate roar. Its huge body was knocked to the ground by the sudden force. It raised its huge bare paw and smashed it down, but the black shadow advanced and retreated like lightning, dodging the paw in an instant. Then, it suddenly approached. In the darkness, a cold light shone, sharp fangs as bright as frost. A dim light flickered in those dark eyes, and a green flame was burning. The black bear's roar came to an abrupt end. All sounds seemed to be blocked in its throat and were drowned out by the gushing blood. Its huge body struggled frantically, but no matter how hard it tried, it could not break free from those terrifying sharp teeth and the ghostly black shadow. Gradually, the demonic beast's body softened. Life flowed out of its strong body like water, like a fountain of blood being drunk dry. The jade-green flames burned in that lonely eye, and the darkness seemed to be roaring faintly. The forest was silent, and everything gradually quieted down. A black shadow slowly walked out of the darkness. It was a black dog whose body had expanded a lot. Its strong and bulging muscles seemed to contain infinite power. When blood dripped from its sharp teeth, it didn't seem to notice. Moonlight sprinkled down from the sky once again, landing on this mountain peak. All the beasts and birds were silent. Only a black dog raised its head and stared at the round moon that was getting fuller and fuller. Suddenly, it opened its mouth and let out a mournful howl towards the bright moon in the sky. "Wu, is there something wrong with your brain?" In Kunwa City's Black Hill Pavilion, Old Ma angrily pointed at Lu Chen and scolded, "Do you think you're still a 17 or 18-year-old boy? Don't you use your brain when you do things? How dare you say that to a true sovereign?" Lu Chen expressionlessly sat across from him. He just shook his head and didn't respond. Old Ma looked at him and became angrier. He even seemed to be trembling with anger. He said, "I really don't understand what you're thinking now. Let's not talk about the past. I think even 10 years ago, you were much smarter than you are now. You knew what to do and what to say. You knew when to keep your mouth shut and swallow those damn words until you die." Old Ma was even more furious when he saw Zhou Donghuang's expression. Lu Chen wiped his face and sighed. He said, "Can you speak properly? Your saliva sprayed on my face." "Bah!" Old Ma said angrily, "I wish I could pour a basin of water on your head." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Well, I'm fine now, aren't I?" Old Ma said coldly, "This is because true sovereign cherishes old friendships. I've told you long ago that he treats you differently. In his heart, you're different from the others. Based on the nonsense you spouted and that damn corpse collection, believe it or not, anyone else would have killed you on the spot to avoid future troubles." Lu Chen slightly lowered his head. After a moment of silence, he said, "Do you really think so?" "Yes." Old Ma said flatly, "I know you're suspicious, but it's not your fault. You've been a shadow for so many years. Back then, in the devil cult, you were tense day and night and couldn't sleep at night. For more than 10 years, you were tormented by life and death every day. To be honest, I admire you for not going crazy. But you can't be like this." Old Ma became agitated. He suddenly walked up and grabbed Lu Chen's clothes, roared at him, and then gritted his teeth and said, "Lu Chen, listen, you can doubt everyone in this world, and you can even doubt me, but you really can't doubt true sovereign, do you understand?" Lu Chen didn't resist Old Ma's action. He just frowned slightly, looked at Old Ma and said, "Why?" Old Ma took a deep breath, as if to calm himself down, and then slowly let go of Lu Chen's clothes. His eyes gradually softened. After a moment, he suddenly smiled bitterly and said, "For so many years, he raised you, cultivated you, and everything you did was for him. If you really doubt him, then what is the first half of your life? Nothing? Or a dream?" Old Ma stared at him and said softly. Lu Chen was silent. Old Ma paced back and forth a few steps in front of him, and then walked to the door. Looking at the deserted alley outside the house, he said, "And speaking of which, what need does true sovereign have to harm you? What can you threaten him with? In terms of strength, he is a deity stage true sovereign. Compared to you, this kind of trash, the difference is like heaven and earth. In terms of reputation, his name shakes the world, you are unknown. In terms of secrets, what you helped him do was to deal with the evil sect. But his reputation of being the most effective in dealing with the evil sect has long been known by the world. So I really can't think of any reason why he would harm you, and why is it worth your suspicion?" Lu Chen was silent for a long time. Then he smiled bitterly and said, "So you're saying, I was too suspicious and blamed him wrongly?" "Yes." Old Ma nodded, then stared at Lu Chen, his expression solemn, and said, "Brother, listen to me, don't let your imagination run wild, don't go the wrong way. Just follow true sovereign, and you will naturally have a bright future." That day, when he left the Black Hill Pavilion and walked out of that deep alley, the sun shone from behind him. Lu Chen saw the shadow on the ground in front of him. He stopped, somewhat in a daze. He took a step, and the shadow moved. He took a step, and the shadow moved again. He looked to the side and found that there was a shady place under the high wall where the sun could not reach. He walked over and stood under the wall. The sun could not shine on him. He looked at his feet. The shadow was gone. Lu Chen looked silently. After a long time, he stepped forward and walked out of the alley. Heavenly Soldier Hall of Kunlun Mountain. When he walked all the way, the Kunlun disciples along the way were very respectful to him. He had cultivated to the Jin Dan realm at a young age and was recognized as one of the most outstanding geniuses in the sect. Not to mention that he had a promising future, he was also nurtured and cared for by the head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukonjinren. Even the head of the sect, Immortal Idle Month, valued him very much. Such a talent was really worthy of the 4 words, God's favored one. However, he had never been arrogant. On the contrary, after he broke through to the Jin Dan realm, his temperament and self-restraint seemed to have gone up another level. He treated people with courtesy. Whether it was ordinary disciples or odd-job disciples, he treated them equally. The way he talked and handled things made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. At the same time, he was even more respected. His reputation in the sect was rising day by day. When Dukonjinren saw his favorite disciple walk in, he could not help but smile. No matter who it was, even if he was a famous Yuanyingjinren for many years, to have such a satisfactory disciple was the most satisfying thing for him. "Why did you come today? What's the matter?" Dukonjinren asked He with a smile. He respectfully bowed to his master as usual before he spoke. Dao Master Dukong laughed and helped him up. Then, he said, "There are no outsiders here. So, you don't need to be so polite." He straightened his body, smiled and said, "It's what I should do." After speaking, he straightened his expression and said to Dukonjinren, "Master, I really have something that I need to report to you." Say it." He took out a piece of cloth from his bosom and passed it to Dukonjinren. Dukonjinren unfolded it. It was a rubbing of a pattern. The pattern was twisted and complicated. It looked vaguely familiar. He could not help but was stunned. "What is this?" He said, "Ever since I caught that evil faction spy, disciple was inspired. I once again carefully investigated the first case of Yi Changsheng's murder. Finally by chance, I found this pattern." Dukonjinren's spirit was roused. "What does this pattern mean? Do you know?" He said, "Disciple is very familiar with the evil faction's secret language. I can tell that the meaning of this secret pattern is, on the night of the full moon, we will meet at the same place." Dukonjinren suddenly stood up. "Really?" He nodded and said, "That's true. And this secret pattern is much more brilliant than the one used by the evil faction spy. In addition to the reincarnation formation that appeared, it must be an important person from the evil faction lurking in our Kunlun party." Dukonjinren beamed with joy. He patted He's shoulder hard. "You are indeed my good disciple. You will have a great merit." He smiled. "Actually, disciple came here this time to report to master. With my meager skills, I'm afraid I may not be able to accomplish such a big thing. Perhaps if we really have to capture this person, master will have to do it yourself. Therefore, the one who deserves the greatest credit should be you, master." Dukonjinren was shocked. "Me?" He nodded his head. "It has to be you." Chapter 214. There were only 2 days left until the night of the full moon. That morning, the sky was gloomy. Dark clouds gathered above the Kunlun mountain range, and soon, it began to rain. From a distance, the entire Kunlun mountain range was hidden in the gray rain, faintly discernible. The air in the mountain became humid, and transparent pearl-like water droplets dripped down from the eaves, forming a crystal-clear curtain of water. Under the eaves, the window was half open, and a gentle breeze blew past, carrying a layer of rain powder into the house, swirling and spreading, then dissipating in the warm air here. The faint fragrance of tea spread from a wisp of smoke curling up from the table in the house, refreshing the mind, as if one could already feel the sweetness before drinking it. There were two people at the table, a white-haired man and a woman, sitting opposite each other, sipping tea. Melaleuca japonica carried a small and exquisite teapot, pouring a cup of tea into the teacup of the person opposite her, then smiled and said, "This is the tea from your precious disciple's house, what do you think?" The man opposite her was naturally the one who had accepted Xian as his disciple, Dongfang Tao, who had recently broken through to become a Yuanying spiritual master. He picked up the teacup and smelled it, nodded slightly, then took a sip, exclaiming, "Good tea." Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Stop pretending, don't think that I don't know you didn't drink tea before, and now you know what good tea is? It's for the sake of your disciple, isn't it?" Dongfang Tao chuckled, put down the teacup, and looked at Melaleuca japonica and said, "I can't hide anything from you. But to be honest, I've been in seclusion these days, unable to take care of Xian, and it's all thanks to you taking care of her outside, thank you very much." Melaleuca japonica waved her hand and said, "It's just a small matter, and speaking of it, I've also been negligent, causing that girl Xian to suffer so much. Even now, I still feel bad thinking about it." Dongfang Tao went silent for a moment before he shook his head and said, "That matter is already in the past, and it's not your fault. There's no need to bring it up again. Moreover, I heard a few days ago that He Gang suddenly died in Kunwa City. This can be considered as retribution for evil." Melaleuca japonica lightly nodded her head and said, "At least Xian is a broad-minded child. After suffering so much, if it was any other girl of her age, I'm afraid they wouldn't be able to bear it. However, she actually managed to pull through after the incident. Now, it looks like she has almost forgotten about those things. It's really rare." Dongfang Tao smiled faintly and said, "Just take it as a form of tempering for her temperament. As long as it's beneficial to her cultivation in the future, then it wouldn't have been in vain." Melaleuca japonica nodded in agreement. In the life of a cultivator, the most important thing was naturally the cultivation of one's own cultivation. What Dongfang Tao said was actually the common view of many cultivators. She picked up the teapot and once again added water boiled from the spiritual spring in the mountain. For a moment, a fragrant aroma filled the air. Coupled with the soft sound of rain outside and the sound of water dripping, the room seemed especially elegant. "When Xian brings people over later, you should at least give her some face and be a bit more polite to that Su Qingjun," Melaleuca japonica said as she poured tea for Dongfang Tao. A hint of helplessness appeared on Dongfang Tao's face as he said, "That girl only knows how to make trouble for me all day long. The sect council meeting is in 2 days, and I've just ascended to Yuanying. It's the time to make friends with fellow cultivators in the same realm as me in the sect. But she's really good. She's been begging me for half a day, insisting that I go and treat someone." Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Xian is a kind-hearted child. She's good friends with that Su Qingjun, and they even address each other as sisters. This time, I heard that the Su family is really at their wits' end. They've begged everywhere, but to no avail. Su Qingjuan's younger brother is probably in a desperate situation. She's begging to come over and let you see if there'll be any pleasant surprises." Dongfang Tao snorted and said, "I'm not one of your Bai Chao Tang people. I can't treat people." Melaleuca japonica scolded him with a smile and said, "Don't talk nonsense. In any case, you're already here today. You should at least see her. Moreover, I've seen that girl Su Qingjun a few times. She's well educated and has outstanding talent. Especially now that she's only 22 years old, she's already cultivated the Jin Dan. This achievement is much better than when we were young. I'm afraid she'll be an amazing genius in the future. Your disciple will also benefit in the future if he's on good terms with her. Old man, don't be unreasonable here. Just think of it as paving the way for your good disciple. Dongfang Tao rolled his eyes. Although he was now a spiritual master of Yuanying, he was very casual in front of Melaleuca Japonica. Obviously, the two of them had a very close relationship. Even if Melaleuca Japonica scolded him with a smile, he didn't care at all. He just shrugged and agreed. Halfway up the mountain, far away from the tea room, a group of people were walking over in the rain. The two people in front were young women holding umbrellas. They were Xian and Su Qingjun. Behind them, there were several servants carrying a sedan chair. The curtain of the sedan chair hung down, making it impossible to see the situation inside. However, one could vaguely see the figure of a man sitting inside. The rain floated down, hitting the cloth of the umbrella with a low sound. Sparkling and translucent water droplets continuously slid down from the umbrella. The woman under the umbrella stared ahead, looking at the misty mountain rain. White mist curled up among the green mountains and trees. The world was hazy. Her face was slightly pale, and there was a trace of tiredness between her eyebrows. When the breeze and drizzle brushed past her temples, it seemed to add a trace of sorrowful beauty. "Sister Su, don't worry too much." Xian's voice came from the side. Su Qingjun made a sound of agreement, smiled at her, and nodded. "This time, I really have to thank you, Sister Xian." Su Qingjun said, "If you hadn't begged, I'm afraid that Martial Uncle Dongfang might not have been willing to take the time to look at Sumo's situation. This is a small matter. Don't take it to heart." Xian shook her hand and said with a smile, "On the other hand, my master's temper is very difficult. I've already told him to go down the mountain to visit your Su family, but he refused to go and insisted on staying on this mountain. He even had to trouble you to bring people over. He's really pissed me off." It's fine. Su Qingjun hurriedly said, "As long as Martial Uncle Dongfang is willing to help take a look at Sumo, we should go up the mountain. There's no reason for him to move." "Sister, you can't say that." Xian pouted and complained. It seemed that she was still somewhat dissatisfied with her master. However, she quickly turned to something else and moved closer to Su Qingjun. She lowered her voice and said, "Sister Su, these troubles are actually nothing. It's fine as long as he can be cured. But I'm afraid that if—" Su Qingjun sighed, but her expression didn't change at all. She only smiled bitterly and said, "Sister, you should know about my current situation. I've invited quite a few seniors of the sect to take a look, but none of them can do anything. Today, I've asked to see Martial Uncle Dongfang, but it's actually a desperate attempt. I'm just holding on to a sliver of hope. If there's really no way to cure him, then it's Sumo's fate. I can't ask for anything more. Let him be." Xian nodded. There was a hint of sympathy in her eyes. She turned around and saw the shadow of a house in front of her. She hurriedly said, "It's right in front. We'll be there soon." Su Qingjun looked at the house that had appeared in front of her. The scene that she had seen that day when she and Lu Chen had gone to the martyr's grave together suddenly appeared before her eyes. In the dark and mysterious courtyard of the martyr's grave, Dongfang Tao and the corpse watcher had engaged in a short but intense battle. Sumo's mind had been damaged, sometimes good, sometimes bad. The root cause of everything had clearly started from that martyr's grave. However, due to the current situation, the Su family could not pursue the matter further. It was just that when she had searched everywhere for experts to treat her to no avail and everyone in the family had almost given up all hope, Su Qingjun thought of Dongfang Tao. Although she didn't know much about this newly ascended nascent soul Daoist master, from what she had seen that day, Dongfang Tao seemed to have some unknown relationship with that grave and that mysterious corpse watcher. Perhaps, a miracle would happen if she came to his place? Su Qingjun did not know. She could only come here with this last bit of hope. At home, her father was haggard and her mother was sad. Right now, she could only rely on herself. However, at this time, she did not know why. In this clear and cold misty rain that was falling from the mountains, as she walked in the pitter-patter of rain with an umbrella, she suddenly thought of Lu Chen. That morning, he had still been by her side as they walked together to that dark martyr's grave. Now that she thought about it, although she was worried at that time, perhaps there was still some inadvertent warmth in her heart. Where is he now? The group walked out of the tea room. Xian and Su Qingjun closed their umbrellas and walked to the door. Xian knocked on the door. A moment later, a creaking sound was heard. The two doors opened by themselves. A voice came from inside the room. "Come in." The two walked in. The room was decorated simply and elegantly. In the middle of the room, there was a tea table. Two people were sitting there. It was Dongfang Tao and Melaleuca Japonica. Su Qingjun bowed respectfully. Disciple Su Qingjun pays respect to Dongfang Shishu. Melaleuca Japonica Shishu. Apologies for disturbing you today. Dongfang Tao did not say anything. Melaleuca Japonica smiled and said, "Get up. We are all so familiar with each other. There is no need to be so polite. Come and sit." Xian, who was at the side, had already run over to Dongfang Tao's side. She grabbed one of his hands and said coquettishly, "Master, don't forget what you promised me. You must take a good look at Sister Su." All right. I know." Dongfang Tao was obviously very fond of Xian. He shook his head helplessly. Then he looked at Su Qingjun. He looked her up and down. He smiled and said, "You are Su Qingjun. I have long heard that senior brother Mahara has accepted a good disciple. Seeing you today, you really live up to your reputation. You are really a talented genius." Su Qingjun blushed. She bowed her head and said, "Shishu is too kind." Dongfang Tao smiled gently at Su Qingjun. "Xian has already told me everything. Don't worry. I will naturally do my best to help you take a look at your brother. Get someone to bring him in." Su Qingjun's face lit up. She said gratefully, "Thank you, Shishu." Chapter 2:15. Because Dongfang Tao wanted to examine Sumo carefully, the two young women, Xian and Su Qingjun, left first and stood in the corridor not far from the tea room, waiting. The corridor was built of pine wood and painted with colorful paint. The horizontal sill was painted with all kinds of exquisite patterns of mountains, rivers, and all kinds of auspicious beasts were carved on the left and right eaves, lively and lifelike. Outside the corridor, there were all kinds of trees, tall and straight. The leaves of the closest banana trees had been washed by the rain until they were verdant and tender. It was a very lovable sight. The raindrops fell on the eaves and the ground, making pitter-patter sounds, adding a trace of serenity to the originally quiet place. Su Qingjun looked at the misty rain outside the corridor, her brows slightly furrowed, as if she was in a trance. "Sister Su, don't worry, there's always hope." Xian saw Su Qingjun's expression and couldn't help but comfort her. Su Qingjun smiled and said in a low voice, "I know, thank you, sister." Xian nodded and also looked at the rain outside the corridor, but there was no melancholy on her face. After a while, she seemed to remember something and said to Su Qingjun, "Right, Sister Su, I want to ask you something." "Yes, what is it?" Su Qingjun said. Xian said, "I went to Flying Goose Terrace yesterday because I hadn't seen Brother Lu and Atsu for a long time. But when I went to see, I found that Brother Lu and Atsu were not there, and," she stole a glance at Su Qingjun and said, "Brother Lu's things don't seem to be in his wooden hut anymore. It looks like he's moved away." Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she nodded lightly and said, "Yes, Lu Chen moved away." Xian was shocked and said, "What's going on, Sister Su?" Su Qingjun hesitated for a moment, but she still roughly told Exin about what happened that day. Then she smiled bitterly and said, I didn't expect Lu Chen to be like this. These days, my family was in a mess because of sumo. Maybe I had neglected something in my daily life. I forgot that sumo had hurt him before, so I didn't pay attention to his feelings. That's why he left angrily and even asked me to cancel his title as a nominal disciple. Exin was stunned, and then said with some distress, this brother Lu, what is he doing all of a sudden? I've never seen him so impulsive in the past. Su Qingjun pursed her lips and said, perhaps, he was dissatisfied with me, so he was impulsive. On the contrary, in front of you, he has always been fine. I also don't understand what he is thinking. Exin giggled and said, Sister Su, don't worry, leave this matter to me. Su Qingjun asked curiously, what are you going to do? Exin said, I'll go find Brother Lu later and ask him what is going on. This person is getting old, maybe he has become stupid. He clearly had such a comfortable life with you on Flying Goose platform, but he just doesn't want to live it and wants to make trouble. I have to scold him to wake him up. As she said that, she pursed her lips and looked a little unconvinced as she complained, look at him, he still calls me stupid all day long. The most stupid person should be himself. Although Su Qingjun was worried about Sumo's injury at the moment and was not in a good mood, she looked at Exin and could not help but laugh. She shook her head and said with a smile, you too, why do you always say others are stupid? Moreover, Lu Chen is not even 30 this year, how can he be considered old like you said? Those who don't know would think that he is now 70 or 80 years old. Exin snorted and said, I think Brother Lu's tone and the way he talks are really like an old man. In short, when things are done here, I will go find him and help you scold him. Su Qingjun shook her head and wanted to dissuade her, but she thought to herself, what do you mean by going to force that person to stay or persuade him to come back? However, when the words were on the tip of her tongue, her heart suddenly softened. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. In the end, she laughed bitterly and thought to herself, go ahead, I still have a lot of things to do here. I can't care so much. If Exin wants to say it, then say it. Who cares if you want to come back or not? At this time, Dongfang Tao's slightly bewildered voice suddenly rang out in the originally quiet tea room, as if he had discovered something shocking. Su Qingjun and Exin were both shocked. After looking at each other, they hurriedly ran to the tea room and pushed the door open. In the tea room, they saw that Sumo had been placed on a recliner to the side. Her face was pale and her eyes were tightly shut, as if she had already fainted. Dongfang Tao stood beside him with a rather ugly expression on his face. Without waiting for Su Qingjun to speak, Exin had already rushed to ask, Master, did you discover something? Dongfang Tao's expression was dark as he said coldly, it's the mind-altering technique. Su Qingjun was shocked at first, then overjoyed. Although many of the seniors of the sect who had seen Sumo in the past could tell that Sumo's mind had been damaged, they could not tell what method it was. Only today, when Dongfang Tao examined her, was able to directly tell what technique Sumo had endured. This had never happened before. At this moment, Su Qingjun's originally somewhat despaired mood seemed to suddenly see a glimmer of light in the darkness. She could not help but become excited. On the side, Exin asked in confusion, the mind-altering technique? What is that? Dongfang Tao frowned and ignored his disciple. After thinking for a moment, he turned to face Su Qingjun. A trace of anticipation appeared on Su Qingjun's face as she nervously looked at spiritual master Yuanying, Uncle Master Dongfang, can Sumo still be saved? Dongfang Tao hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, your brother has been inflicted with an extremely overbearing mind-altering technique. Because his cultivation is too low, the overbearing spiritual energy rushed into his brain and damaged his mind. Su Qingjun secretly clenched her fists, Uncle Master Dongfang, please save him. Dongfang Tao was silent for a moment, then said, I can see the cause of his illness, but I cannot cure the mind-altering technique. However, I know who can, but that person's temper is strange, I'm afraid. Su Qingjun bowed down. Uncle Master, please save my brother. No matter the price, the Su family will do our best. Dongfang Tao frowned and paced back and forth in the room. After a moment, he looked at Xian with a deep gaze. Xian was puzzled by her master's gaze and asked in surprise, Master, why are you looking at me? Quickly help Sister Su. Dongfang Tao smiled bitterly, shook his head and sighed, then said to Su Qingjun, Fine, I'll give up my old face and help you. If I'm lucky, I might be able to get an antidote for you. Su Qingjun's face was filled with gratitude and joy as she nodded repeatedly, Thank you, Uncle Master. Dongfang Tao took a deep breath, then walked towards the door of the tea room with his hands behind his back. Melaleuca japonica looked at him with some concern, walked over and whispered, Are you all right? I'm fine, at most we'll fight again, Dongfang Tao said lightly, Anyway, I'm yuanying now, he can't beat me. Xian was a warm-hearted and good girl who kept her word. After Dongfang Tao had left, she waited idly and since she had nothing to do, she left the tea room and descended the mountain to look for Lu Chen. However, Lu Chen had now left Flying Goose Terrace. According to Su Qingjun, when he left that day, he only said that they were no longer master and disciple, but did not mention a word about his future plans. Therefore, Su Qingjun herself did not know where Lu Chen had gone. In this huge Kunlun mountain, there were almost 100,000 odd-job disciples. If she really wanted to look for them one by one, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, of course, Xian was not such a stupid girl. People who usually said that she was stupid were slandering her, such as that old man, called Lu Chen. Xian scolded Lu Chen in her heart to vent her anger, then quickly thought of a way. Based on her understanding of Lu Chen, if she wanted to find Lu Chen now, other than Flying Goose Terrace, there were a few other places. She went to Flowing Fragrance Garden, but unfortunately, there was no harvest. She went to Stone Mountain, but also did not see him. Xian ran to the mountain gate, ran to the mountain pavilion where she first met Lu Chen on Kunlun Mountain, and also did not see his shadow. This man seemed to suddenly disappear from the Kunlun party, no one noticed, and no one knew. Where did he go? Later, Xian suddenly thought that no matter what, even if this person left Flying Goose Terrace, he would still have to find a place to live in the Kunlun Mountain. Therefore, she quickly thought of the house that Lu Chen used to live in. She ran over excitedly, but saw that the door of Lu Chen's old house was guarded by an iron general, and it was covered with dust. Obviously, no one lived here. Turning around the back of the house, she could actually see a small dog hole. A long time ago, Black Dog came in and out of this place. Xian was a little discouraged. For the first time, she felt that this brother Lu seemed to be hiding in a secret place, and she could not find him. When she thought of how she had boasted in front of Su Qingjuan's sister Su, Xian felt a little embarrassed, but there was nothing she could do. She just sighed, turned around, and left. This place was the residential area of the part-time disciples, and many houses were occupied. They used to be Lu Chen's neighbors. But now it was daytime, and most of the people had already left to work. There were not many people left, and there were only a few lonely houses. As she was walking, Xian suddenly stopped. She saw a strange-looking house in the distance. Compared to the surrounding houses, that house looked especially cold and dilapidated. Xian suddenly felt that it was a little familiar, and walked in the direction of that house for a distance. When she got closer, she suddenly remembered that this house used to belong to He Changsheng. Later, after the vicious devil cult spies killed He Changsheng, this house was abandoned here for some reason. She was looking at the house in a daze. Suddenly, a hand stretched out from behind her, and gently patted her shoulder. Xian was startled, and jumped up in fright, shouting loudly, Who? Who is it? You're tuning in to the Unparalleled Sword Will YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.